911. What is the address of the emergency?
I don't know. I'm just at the corner. It's like Sheridan and 20th. We're in the parking lot right behind the Dunkin' Donuts.
Okay,
It's right by that, like, the bar in Northern Lights Dispensary.
what's going on there?
Some guy just got shot, and he's on the ground. He's, like, face down. And they took off in a silver two-door Pontiac. He's in the parking lot, like, face down. We're standing right next to him. He's still conscious, and he's still breathing.
Where did he get shot at?
Where did he get shot at? I don't know. He's face down. He's not talking.
On April 5th, 2018, just after 8 p.m., we responded to a report of a shooting. At that point, we didn't know if the victim was alive or dead, but we knew as officers that this was a very bad situation. When we got to the scene, we activated their body cameras.
All right.
Hey, Lincoln 1, incoming units, we need to get this.
You know what, I better actually pull out so that they can get medical in here.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Medical's gonna have to get into this.
I'm gonna drive.
EMS was very quick to arrive. They started working on the victim, who had one single gunshot wound to his chest.
Yeah, they're doing CPR on a guy like that.
He's got one, right?
Who are these folks that are right here?
This guy here's got a car. He wants to get out, but
Yeah, no, we're shutting the place down.
At that point in time, we weren't sure if he was alive or dead or what the situation was. So during all this commotion, the victim was pronounced dead on scene.
In the parking lot near the victim, a wallet had been located, and opening it, a Colorado ID was found to an Andrew Janicek. This is a very crazy circumstance for me because I went to high school with Andrew. During that time, he played football, and I was a manager of the football team, so I interacted with Andrew pretty frequently. I was in shock.
Andrew, he was the sweetest kid. Actually, he was the first boy in our family on my side, and my mother just adored him. He was a chunky little baby. I kept saying, how can 3 folds of fat in your legs be so darn cute? But Andrew was always a big kid. Andrew was a very curious little boy, seeked a lot of pleasure in music. I think that was his biggest passion. Yeah, it was April 6th when I found out. I got up that morning and I get a call from the Edgewater PD, and they said, I'd like to come over to your house and talk to you. And I'm thinking, what the hell happened? They get there, it's Brandon Chalice and a victim's advocate. They come into my house and we're all sitting at my kitchen table. And he said, there's just no way to tell you, but Andrew's dead. All I could do was cry. It just didn't seem like it was real. It just felt like my world just crumbled at that time.
So I was working at the time, and I got a call from one of our buddies on the football team. And I could tell immediately something was wrong. I could hear it in his throat. And he said Andrew was murdered yesterday. And we just broke into tears. I mean, what do you say or do? It was just shock. There's no words for what that moment feels like.
What gloves, Jason? Do you want some chewing gum?
I just might want an extra pair of gloves if you have.
Yeah, it'll really help if you're holding the light and measuring.
Yeah.
And all that shit.
I got you.
Once everything had kind of calmed down, we turned our attention to the evidence. Some of the evidence that I found on scene was a single spent 9mm shell casing nearby, Andrew's wallet that had cash inside of it. I also located a cell phone with a sticky note on the back with an order for barbecue. As we were scanning the parking lot looking for additional evidence, we didn't locate any firearms. I also located Andrew's car in the parking lot, and we found no weapons inside of Andrew's car.
When you see the wallet is still on the ground and none of the money's missing, motive becomes unclear. It makes you think, was this a target attack? Did the suspect know the victim? We knew that we were going to have to dig deep to solve this mystery.
So as we were combing the scene, we noticed that there was a camera on the side of a nearby barbecue restaurant, which matched up with the sticky note that I found on Andrew's phone right next to the scene. Now we're asking ourselves, could that camera have caught the shooting, the shooter, or at very least the vehicle that left the scene? So officers went to the restaurant, started knocking on the front door, tried the door, nobody was answering. They tried going around the back, then continued knocking on the door. Finally, somebody kind of peeked through, noticed it was uniformed law enforcement officers trying to get in, and answered the door for us.
You can tell we had an incident happen out here in the parking lot. Let me see if our camera's playing. Actually, yeah, if you guys have camera footage, that would be awesome.
They were able to pull up the video footage for us almost immediately, which was a miracle.
Saw where the dude was on the ground back there when you pulled her up.
Okay.
So you can catch the corner of it right here, it looks like.
Okay.
So you might be able to see something.
Okay.
Video footage, it was pretty grainy. We could see what happened, but not great. We were able to look at the timestamp, which was directly in the vicinity of the 911 call.
It was hard to see what type of vehicle it was. So the surveillance had to be sent off to forensics for analysis, for further investigation to be able to identify the vehicle and persons inside the vehicle.
We appreciate your help, man. That's awesome.
I mean, any little thing, could actually help.
Once we exited the restaurant, we turned our attention to the two 911 callers. They were still on scene in the barbecue parking lot. Right now, they're the closest thing we have to the truth behind what happened to Andrew. We didn't know what kind of connection they had with the case.
A lot of times when we interview witnesses, you want everything to be their own raw emotions, raw feelings, raw memories and testimony without being guided or coerced. So we made the decision to take the 911 callers to the station for an interview.
Alrighty. So I told you before, Corporal Nathan Rivers is investigating the shooting at the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. Could you state your full name?
Alexis Jordan Ellis.
Okay. And you're the one that called 911, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start with just take me through. Take me through your night. I'm gonna jot some notes down. I might stop you, but try to get through.
Okay. We pulled up, we parked in the back parking lot. My friend got out to go into the dispensary. Sitting on my phone, playing on Facebook. Heard the shot, thought it was a firework for a second until I looked up and saw the victim face down on the floor. And there was a silver Pontiac in front of the victim. And the shooter was in front of the car, still kind of standing by the victim's body with the gun pointed at him, and then got back into the Pontiac on the passenger side.
So from the information we got from Alexis, this incident seemed really quick, really sudden, and then she dropped this bombshell on us.
Are you familiar with guns?
That's what I'm on probation for.
Okay.
I was dating a guy for 3 weeks. He asked for a ride and shot and killed somebody at the King Soopers.
So when somebody discloses that they're on probation because they were a witness to another murder, it definitely raises a lot of suspicion and raises a lot of questions. So why are you here? What type of situations do you put yourself into? Was she involved in the murder in some way, shape, or form? This was a significant lead that could potentially help us find out what happened to Andrew.
As we were talking to this 911 caller, Alexis, obviously we got this information that she was on probation and that she had been a witness in this other murder. So we had to start treading lightly and making sure that we were paying extra attention to what was going on.
So you heard a gun go off?
Yeah, he was 5 feet in front of me, lounge.
You got some tremendous luck.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually have his trial next week to go testify against, and I go downtown tomorrow to get prepped, so.
Keep charged?
Yeah.
So it makes it seem like either really bad luck or really suspicious that this person's at the wrong place at the wrong time yet again.
So then we turned our attention to our second 911 caller. When we're interviewing two people who are at the same incident at the same time, we're hoping to get pretty much the same story and hopefully some additional information from each witness, but we're hoping that the stories primarily line up.
So I walked up to the dispensary, was in there for maybe 5 minutes, left her in the car because she doesn't have her ID and she can't. Alexis. I came back out, looked at her, I saw this dude on the ground. I was talking 911 and then she was standing there. We didn't start CPR immediately.
Both of the 911 caller stories actually were very consistent with each other, and they provided a lot of the same information.
When we were able to check and see if they had any past connections to Andrew, we found out they had none, neither one of them. So we took them off of our suspect list.
Okay, man, come in.
But one thing was for certain, somebody pulled the trigger and that person was still out there.
The moment I realized what had happened, the only thing running through my mind was that I needed to try and help. When I tried to speak to him, the only thing he said was, "Please help me." When I found out Andrew didn't make it, it hurt my heart. I worked really hard to try and get him back. It definitely stung.
The thing that's amazing about this young woman, once the car sped away, she ran to him and she asked him if he was okay. And he said, "No, can you help me?" And she said she held him and he died in her arms. I told her that the only salvation I have is knowing that when he left this world, those monsters weren't the last thing that he saw her.
Shortly after we were conducting our interviews, a call for a missing person comes in, and it turned out to be Andrew's girlfriend, Jessica. When you get a call like that, one of the things you want to do is you want to drop everything, go interview that caller, and find out what's going on.
When we got to the apartment, Jessica was a little concerned as to why so many officers had shown up. I asked her some brief questions about what Andrew had done, where he had gone, what he was doing.
So he was just going out to pick up dinner and didn't come back. He didn't say he was going anywhere else. Okay. Usually he informs me if he's gonna do some other errands on top of something like this.
Okay. So as I'm initially speaking with her, I don't want to give her too much information about what happened to Andrew because I'm not sure if she has anything to do with this. And I'm hopeful she doesn't, but you never know.
He's probably got like 15 missed calls from me, and then I called him about 2 or 3 o'clock this morning, and his phone was just dead.
When's the first time you tried calling him after 8:30?
I think I probably tried to call him around 9:30 and 10.
So after having a brief interview with Jessica, coming to the determination that Jessica probably didn't have any involvement in this, I sat her down and I had to tell her that Andrew wasn't missing, that Andrew had been shot and that he was killed.
Oh my God.
And I know it's very difficult for you, and I know us answering all these questions that we're kind of barraging you with is kind of difficult.
One of the most difficult things a police officer can do or be a part of is letting somebody know their loved one has passed away or had been killed. Just seeing the reaction to people being delivered that news takes a toll on everybody on scene.
I'm just not expecting to hear that he's been shot and killed in a parking lot down the street from my apartment.
I know, but there was no easy way for me to tell you, obviously.
She was devastated. She was sad. She was crying. She was confused, and I think she was hurt.
And you're sure it's him?
We had his identification, everything on scene, and his work ID.
And as we were trying to piece together Andrew's final minutes, we asked Jessica some very pointed questions.
Does he carry a gun?
And so yes, Sky SCCY, 9mm.
What color is it?
It's silver and black. Yeah.
Where do you keep that gun?
I keep it in its case in our closet.
The SCCY pistol is a small, compact 9mm. 9mm is the same caliber that we found on scene.
We asked her if anything was missing, and that's when she tells us one of the guns was. So to me at this point, I'm wondering, well, maybe in that struggle was Andrew's firearm taken from him and maybe used against him?
Is there anywhere else that firearm would be?
That's the only place I can think of possibly, because I don't know if he put that in his car or not. Because he always kept everything in here.
During the initial investigation of the crime scene, officers did search Andrew's vehicle and they did not locate the gun inside the vehicle. If the gun wasn't in the apartment and it wasn't in the car, where was it?
Do you guys let anybody else borrow your firearms or anything like that? No.
No. We don't even tell anyone about him. The only people that know about him are our parents.
We knew we weren't dealing with just a homicide, but that family's worst nightmare.
I needed to contact his mother, Julie Genesek. I called Julie. I told her that I needed to have a conversation with her, and it was something we had to do in person. When I got to Julie's house, I was able to ask Julie some questions. One of those questions I asked Julie was if her son had any enemies. She indicated to me that he had one that she knew of, and it was Jessica's brother.
Her brother had gotten out of jail and threatened Andrew. At the time, we realized that it was something critical. I mean, somebody coming out of prison. I don't take it lightly.
With this new information about Jessica, Andrew's girlfriend, that about a year prior, Jessica's brother threatened Andrew. And with Andrew's gun being missing and unaccounted for, now I'm wondering, why didn't Jessica tell us this? And is this a credible or serious threat? It was imperative for us to bring in Jessica once more for questioning.
You doing okay?
Yeah.
I wanted to keep Jessica at ease. I didn't want her to feel attacked. I wanted to know why she hadn't told us about this incident involving her brother and Andrew.
Your brother had threatened Andrew.
Yeah, he didn't threaten him directly. It was indirectly to me.
Can you elaborate on that for me?
I had some concerns. Obviously, if somebody's threatening to kill your loved one, especially if that person's a family member, and now there's a potential that a firearm is missing from your house, that would be information that you might want to share with law enforcement.
My brother and I were having a fight, and that's when he said his comment, and it really unnerved me, so I told Andrew, and then Andrew wanted to take it to the police, and the police said your best option would be just to move away from the situation, so we did.
There was a part of me that was thinking she might be trying to protect her brother at this point, but I didn't know. It was a mystery.
He just said that he would take him out with his friends or whatever.
What do you think he meant by that?
I mean, well, the first thought to my head is to kill him.
So with this information, I think it kind of broadened our scope a little bit, and now we just had more information to follow up on.
Andrew hasn't seen my brother in a year, or talked to him or anything, and Andrew has not come up in a conversation between my brother and I. So,
retrospect kind of seems a little important, though.
With the threats from Joseph to Andrew, and the fact that a gun was missing, I thought, this is pretty serious. We need to find Joseph. We divided our workload, and we provided this lead to CBI to follow up on. They located Joseph, picked him up, brought him in for an interview, and CBI conducted the interview with Joseph. Joseph was extremely cooperative. He fully admitted that, yeah, he did have that confrontation, and that he did threaten Andrew. He stated he would never actually follow up on that threat, and Joseph was able to provide an alibi that he was actually out of the state during the time of this incident. It's a little frustrating. Once you get rid of a lead and you cross off your board and you've got to refocus your attention, you just kind of reprioritize.
To me, the whole thing was sad. I felt for Andrew. He definitely was quirky. He had this grin he would get, especially when he was being sarcastic, that he would give. But one of the things about Andrew, and sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about, is he was bullied a lot. But I never once saw Andrew treat them poorly or be negative towards them. He still treated everyone with kindness and respect after he passed. Obviously, I had a lot of questions. Why him? We didn't get a ton of details initially, and we lost a loved one. We couldn't believe it.
After exhausting a lot of our leads, we finally got the security footage back from forensics from the scene at the barbecue restaurant. We were hoping that they could clean up the video enough for us to see any additional details and what was going on between Andrew and this other party. So in the video footage, you can see it as clear as we're gonna get it. You can see Andrew start walking towards the restaurant, and you can see headlights approach from one direction. Andrew gets confronted by another party. There's a brief altercation. You see a flash, a gunshot goes off. Andrew falls to the ground. Party runs into the vehicle, and a vehicle takes off, speeds past Andrew.
Seeing that footage was pretty upsetting to me, that somebody would do something like this, especially because it was to Andrew, my friend. Seeing that really motivated me to do the best work I could to try to help Andrew get justice along with his mom, Julie.
From watching that video footage, we couldn't tell if the shooter was a male, female. We couldn't tell ethnicity. We couldn't tell how many people were in the car. It's a little frustrating.
With further review of the footage, the investigation had a huge breakthrough because we could also see that it was not a silver Pontiac that was used. Like the 911 caller reported, it was actually a silver Mitsubishi Eclipse, and we were able to get a partial plate of that Eclipse.
When we determined we had a partial plate for this vehicle and that we knew that it was a Mitsubishi Eclipse, we started running it. We managed to come back with 2 hits for a Mitsubishi Eclipse, similar color with that partial license plate. One of them belonged to a rent-a-car, and it hadn't been registered in a year or 2. The other one came back, currently registered to an Alicia Valdez.
Looking into her background, she had a pretty long rap sheet, and at the time, she had a warrant out for her arrest from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office for a burglary. Based on that information, we knew we needed to talk to her and see how she was involved in Andrew's death.
As we're conducting our investigation, obviously this is a big investigation for a small city, so we were still relying on other agencies for our help with the investigation. We put an attempt to locate on the vehicle. 2 days later, we learned that Denver had pulled over that vehicle for an improper left turn. That was a huge break for us.
Alicia, gotta have you step out for a second. Don't grab anything with you, okay? Just step on out for me. Go ahead and put this. I'll tell you in a sec, okay? All right, go ahead and put your cigarette down.
Okay, sorry.
You're okay. All right. Put your hands behind your back. You got a warrant, okay?
Wow.
Why do you have a warrant? You probably know that better than I do, but we're gonna do some research and tell you exactly what it is.
As a detective, when you tell somebody that they have a warrant for their arrest and they try to play dumb, it's kind of aggravating, but it's also kind of entertaining because you're the one that committed a crime that has the warrant for your arrest. So why are you trying to pretend that you don't?
Yeah, they put out a felony warrant out for you.
Felony?
Yeah. Yep.
Officers were able to place her into custody without further incident, and our focus then turned to the other individuals that were in the vehicle.
Stand up, man. Stand up. Travis, behind your back. What's going on?
As we were sitting there trying to find out as much information as we could from everybody else that was on scene, it was immediately discovered then that there was a 9mm pistol on the front passenger seat pointing towards the officer in plain view. It's the same caliber that was used in the murder of Andrew Janicek.
You're not gonna tell me there's a gun in the seat next to you? You're gonna tell me that you're gonna try to leave a gun on the seat when you left? That'd be nice to know, wouldn't it? Oh, and a pocket full of bullets. How about this? I'm about to get out of the car. Officer, I have a gun on me. Right? You ever been convicted of a felony before? Okay, all right.
From my experience, whenever somebody is involved in a pretty serious crime like Andrew's homicide, the first thing that people think about is what they need to do with the item used in the killing and where they're going to hide it or destroy it.
There was a thought that maybe this is Andrew's missing gun, or, you know, at the very least that maybe this is the gun responsible for the murder of Andrew Janicek.
Did you let him know that this is in the car? SCCY 9mm?
It was at that point in time that we realized that this is a lot more serious than just a traffic stop for an improper left turn. And we realized that we might be looking at the crew responsible for Andrew Janicek's murder. We realized that the puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place, and we might be one step closer to getting justice for Andrew and his family. The suspects were taken back to the police department for interviews.
We separated all of them so we could get their version of the events and their story, and they wouldn't be able to dilute it with each other's information. The first person we interview is Caleb Vigil, the guy who had the gun in the car.
All right, Caleb, the last part of the form reads, if you want to talk to me about what happened, your answer is yes. If you don't want to talk to me, you should say no. Okay, and our interview is concluded at 6:51 p.m.
When Caleb lawyered up, obviously all questioning ceased against him. It's frustrating because now he's a dead end in the investigation, but we did have other people to interview and investigate at that point in time.
We arrested Caleb for being a felon in possession of a weapon by previous offender. Then we turned our attention to the person driving the car, Alicia Valdez. At first with that interview, we didn't want to go in too hard and kind of scare her off.
What kind of car is it?
2006 Mitsubishi Eclipse.
Okay. So who else uses your car?
Really mainly just me. I don't really like people driving my car. I get really bad anxiety and I don't really trust people.
We were hoping to get some information about where her vehicle had been the night that Andrew was killed, where she had been, and if she knew where her vehicle had been that evening.
Your car was at the scene of a murder. Someone got out of your car, shot someone, and killed them. Got back into your car and drove away. You just told me that you were driving your car all week. You were there when it happened. Right? You need to tell me the truth.
Seeing how she had continued to stick to her story even though we knew she was lying just motivated me and everybody to prove that she had involvement in what happened to Andrew.
I don't recall.
You don't recall?
I don't.
Since Caleb was found with the firearm and with a pocket full of ammunition, we were working under the impression that Caleb was probably our shooter. And I believed that she had information that could tie the whole case together.
Okay, look. We have it on video. I know that the person who shot this guy is a guy. Okay? I know it wasn't you. I know it was your car. You tell me you're the only one driving your car, so you were driving the car.
I mean, yeah, but I don't recall being in wherever you're saying. I'm the only one that drives my car, but
right.
I don't recall.
She had so many holes in the story. She wasn't able to answer certain questions, and her body language alone was just showing a lot of signs of deceit.
Eventually somebody's going to be down to talk to you about this and more likely serve you a warrant for murder.
At that point in time, the color drained out of her face and the realization of what was going on seemed to finally hit her.
Your car is ours. It's one in our case. So I don't know if you own the car. I don't know if you have a lien on it.
Alicia was a little bit shocked. She didn't really understand, or pretended she didn't understand, and couldn't believe that this was happening to her. Alicia was arrested in connection with the murder.
We still had a lot of uncertainties. We still didn't know who was driving the vehicle, who pulled the trigger, who all was actually in the vehicle when this happened.
At this point, we turned our attention to the other person in the car, Devon Howard.
I think Alicia cares for your life. She made that real clear to us.
She's gonna pay for it.
She's kind of screwing herself over. Protect you.
We all know that car has been involved with some bullshit before tonight. Very recently. Which is where her problems come in.
From our interview with Devon, it was almost like he wanted to provide information to keep Alicia out of trouble. Not because he wanted to do it to clear his conscience or be a good person, but simply because he wanted to keep Alicia out of trouble because they were dating at the time.
The mountain is waiting to fall on top of her, and it's happening as we speak. That car was used in a drive-by. Got the license plate of that.
I don't mind getting her out of trouble, but I'm not a lawyer, so I know what is safe to be said.
My instincts were telling me that Devon had a lot more information, a lot more knowledge about what had happened than what he was telling us.
We weren't able to determine what role Devon played in what happened to Andrew, so we had no way of holding him at the time we interviewed him.
So at this point, we had to make a pivotal decision.
The only information that we had gotten from Caleb during his interview was the address for his apartment, which was where he lived with Devon Howard.
We thought Caleb was the shooter, and that's why we executed the search warrant of Caleb's apartment. When we got to the apartment, you got to be careful because in situations like this, a lot of times people have backup plans or they're associated with other people who don't like law enforcement, so you have to treat this with a very serious matter.
Let's go check here. Look good?
Right? Where? Behind the TV. I swear to God,
We're good.
You check behind the bed. Yeah.
Behind, but not under. I don't think anybody can under.
Behind's clear. There's something I can't tell what this
Seems secure. I've been hearing stuff, but I couldn't tell.
One of the biggest keys of evidence that we found inside the apartment was a box of ammunition that had the same casing on it. That was a casing that was found on scene. But as the case was starting to take shape, one question still lingered. Why Andrew was murdered. And the mystery of who killed Andrew Jenisic was finally starting to unravel.
We still needed information to prove that these suspects were tied to Andrew's death.
After we stopped Alicia and impounded the Mitsubishi Eclipse, we ended up doing a search warrant on that vehicle. In that vehicle, we found a receipt from the 7-Eleven closest to the crime scene the night of Andrew's murder. We took that receipt to the 7-Eleven. When we got there, we asked them to see their video footage. They were more than happy to provide that to us. Being able to see that footage was huge. We see the vehicle pull up. We see Devon get out of the driver's seat, not Alicia. We see Devon exit the vehicle. We see Alicia get out of the vehicle. We see Caleb Vigil get out of the vehicle.
One of the big things that security camera footage showed is that Alicia was not the one driving, even though she swore up and down that she never lets anybody else drive her vehicle.
So now we have our witnesses. We have a gun. We have our shell casing. We have our vehicle. And we have 2 murder suspects in custody. Alicia and Caleb And now we're just looking for Devon Howard because we had no reason to initially keep him, but now with this new footage, we know he was there, we know he was involved, and now we need to get him back in custody.
We had gotten some tips that Devon was trying to skip town. He had reached out to somebody about potentially getting his face tattooed to cover up his appearance.
We got information that he was going to be meeting with a tattoo artist in a parking lot at a local ice hockey rink. Myself, Officer Young, and a couple other investigators set up at this ice rink and waited for Devon Howard to get there. All of a sudden, we see Devon walking across the street, and we pounced. Probably one of the best feelings for this case. We ended up placing Devon Howard in custody, and we take him in for another interview. At this time, we come at him with just the facts. I think the only thing that he really cared about was trying to keep Alicia out of trouble.
You guys know she did not pull the trigger. Okay. That's what matters. I'm just here to get her out of trouble. I'm not here to get anyone else in trouble, except for myself, obviously. Right.
When you got situations like that and you got people not wanting people to get in trouble, that clearly shows that they know more than what they're leading on, and you want to be able to press that issue.
All right, so when you see the go down, right? You leave, you come out, yeah, that's here. You come out here and make this way. Do you hit this guy? When he's on, do you hit the...
Accidentally, yes. I was a little panicked because, as I said, it was not planned. I accidentally hit him.
Do you remember if he was lying down or was he up?
I don't remember any of that. I remember it happened somewhere in front of me. I tried to turn, but I still remember running him over because I felt it.
Devon admitted to us that Caleb had shot and killed Andrew, and that Devon himself was the driver of the vehicle that night. I was shocked. I was shocked that he had no remorse for what he and his friends had done, and I was disturbed that he cared so little and valued so little somebody else's life.
I understand, and I'm not saying you weren't, but we're just trying to understand what the mindset is. Is it just a random act that goes bad?
I don't know why the dude got shot. I don't know how the situation occurred. All I know is that the person ended up getting shot.
My opinion was Andrew went to Billy Sims to go get dinner and was confronted by our suspects and was there to be robbed. Caleb Vigil murdered Andrew in the process while trying to be robbed, and the suspects then just took off without taking his money or phone or anything like that, because that wasn't their intention to murder. They were there to rob him.
Andrew died because they showed no compassion for other living beings. I don't think I'll ever experience something like this again. For me to investigate a homicide that involves somebody that I went to high school with is something that I'll probably and hopefully never have to go through again.
The gun that was found in the Mitsubishi Eclipse next to Caleb Vigil was not Andrew's missing gun, but it was the murder weapon. It was test fired and sent off to the lab, and they were able to confirm that it was the same firearm that was used to kill Andrew Janicek. In the summer of 2019, Caleb, Devon, and Alicia were all sentenced in the homicide of Andrew Janicek. They're all serving life without parole. This entire incident was callous. It was senseless. The amount of pain that his family and his friends have to endure to this day, I can't fathom, nor do I ever want to, and it's a tragedy.
On this page, I'm looking at my picture with the football team and Andrew. You can see me on the front row. I didn't play football, but I wanted to be a manager because a lot of my really good friends were on the football team. Andrew was standing here in the third row. I just remember how much of a gentle giant he was and how he was valued as a person and as a friend and as a member of the football team. And I'm just really sad that what happened to Andrew occurred.
to lose someone that you see having a legitimate lifelong relationship with. Just leaves a hole there, and no one can fill that. No one's gonna be what Andrew was. He was one of one. I lost a lifelong friend who would be here with me, playing with my kids, talking about the difficulties of work, balancing everything. It's just gone. And that's the part that hurts the most.
I sat on a board for Parents of Murdered Children for almost 3 years, and I did talk to people. And I heard a lot of horror stories, and you can survive it, but you need help too. This is just not the normal process of death. I was supposed to go first. But I think as humans, we have to grow and try to navigate our lives in a new path.
The night was thick with fog, the kind that clings to the ground like a secret. Streets glistened under the dim glow of streetlights, each puddle reflecting fractured fragments of a world that seemed too quiet, too calm. It was October 1989 in Dayton, Ohio, and no one imagined the storm brewing just beneath the surface of ordinary life. The first hint came from a neighbor's cat, yowling insistently, scratching at the base of a maple tree, ears flattened, fur bristling. Inside the house, a woman had vanished. Her car was gone. Her purse lay abandoned on the kitchen counter. The phone lines were silent. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, of gasoline, of a life paused mid-breath. The family reported her missing, describing her as punctual, meticulous, impossible to lose track of. The police logged the call, promising reassurance, cautioning patience. But even in that first night, shadows crept across the edges of certainty. By morning, the community had started to murmur. Children whispered on the school bus about Mrs. Keller disappearing. Neighbors shared quick glances, eyebrows raised, suspicions thinly veiled. Dayton had never seen a disappearance quite like this. Someone so embedded, so familiar, just evaporating. The local news caught wind. Reporters arrived with cameras and blinking microphones. Mouths rehearsed but eyes wide, scanning for reactions, for tears, for fear. A crowd gathered outside the small brick house, the kind that had hosted birthday parties, barbecues, quiet nights of routine life. Now it stood as a silent monument to uncertainty. The doors were locked, windows shuttered, as if the house itself tried to hold back the truth, to prevent the dark from spilling into daylight. Detective Lawrence Monroe arrived, trench coat soaked from a mist, badge glinting faintly under the yellow haze of a street lamp. He had been on the force for 20 years, seen cases vanish into smoke before, murders cold, lives frozen in limbo. But something about this one gnawed at him. Perhaps it was the meticulous disappearance, the lack of struggle, the eerie calm. Or perhaps it was the way the neighbors looked at him, a mixture of hope and unspoken accusation. He ducked under the yellow tape, notebook in hand, observing the kitchen first, the place everyone would start. A chair was slightly out of alignment, crumbs dusted the countertop, a coffee cup, half empty, still steaming faintly from the night before. Nothing screamed foul play. Nothing hinted at direction. Only absence. The absence of someone, the absence of normalcy, the absence of explanation. Monroe combed the house methodically, each step deliberate. In the bedroom, a calendar on the wall, pages torn precisely at the end of September. Her belongings folded neatly. Her coat hung on a hook. Nothing disturbed. Nothing missing except her. He scribbled notes, diagrams, a map of the apartment, but in the margins of his mind, questions multiplied faster than answers. Will want her gone? What could provoke someone to erase a life so thoroughly? There are no signs of forced entry, no footprints beyond the threshold, no fingerprints out of place. The eerie perfection of the disappearance hinted at someone who knew the routines, the timings, the weak points, the moments of solitude. The first 48 hours were crucial. The community watched, restless, every rumor spreading like wildfire through telephone lines, whispered corridors, and corner stores. People recalled seeing her leave for a late-night walk, her usual path along the river, the lamps reflecting in the rippling water. Someone remembered a figure, dark, lingering at the edge of sight. Another claimed to hear a scream muffled by the fog, fading before they could pinpoint it. None of these reports could be verified, but the pattern of fear took hold, and the town shifted. Windows stayed closed, children were called back from the bus stop early, streets emptied after sundown. Dayton's heart had stilled, and the pulse of caution replaced the rhythm of routine. Detectives pulled the case into the precinct, creating a wall of photographs, timelines, and contact sheets. They traced phone records, noted every visitor to the apartment, interviewed coworkers, friends, anyone who had seen her that week. The missing woman, Emily Keller, had no known enemies. She was organized, respected, and routine-driven. Nothing in her profile suggested a voluntary disappearance. Yet as interviews accumulated, inconsistencies emerged. Minor contradictions, stories half-remembered, gaps in recollection that hinted at unease, at secrets unspoken. Each fragment added to the invisible puzzle, a mosaic with pieces that refused to fit. By the end of the first week, the police expanded the search, involving the State Patrol, canine units, and volunteers. Every park, every abandoned lot, every wooded area near the river was scoured. The fog seemed almost sentient, curling around the searchers' ankles, hiding edges, keeping secrets. Monroe walked the paths himself, flashlights slicing through mist, the beam catching wet leaves, tree branches, shadows that seemed to watch. The town's anxiety grew with each fruitless sweep. Flyers circulated. Phone calls flooded in. Some tips were credible. Others were dead ends or deliberate misdirections. The clock ticked. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And yet, Emily Keller remained suspended in absence, an unresolved question hanging over the city like a low-hanging storm cloud. Months turned to a year. The town's collective memory began to harden. The missing person posters faded from utility poles. News stories retreated from the front page. Children who had whispered on the bus were now teenagers, glancing at the house differently. The maple tree at the curb casting long shadows over what felt like an eternal mystery. The investigation slowed. Leads went cold. DNA analysis was still nascent. Fingerprint databases fragmented, surveillance rare. The tools the detectives had were blunt instruments against a disappearance that seemed almost surgical in its precision. Monroe never left the case. He revisited files nightly, staring at photographs, piecing together mental reconstructions of that foggy night, listening to the echo of unanswered questions that reverberated in the precinct hallways. Strangers passed through town occasionally, eyes lingering on the house. A new family moved in and moved out, unaware of the previous shadow lingering in the bricks. Monroe noted it, recorded it, but no new information emerged. Time had thickened the air. Locals whispered of strange lights along the river at night, of figures glimpsed in the mist, of sounds that vanished as quickly as they arrived. Rumors became folklore, and folklore began to intertwine with memory. Each unverified sighting added to the spectral presence of Emily Keller, a ghost rendered by absence and conjecture, haunting the town's perception more than any tangible threat. By the second year, the case was officially cold. The police department issued bulletins reminding the public that the investigation was ongoing. Yet in practical terms, resources were limited, energy depleted. Monroe remained obsessed. Each case file, each note, each interview transcript was revisited obsessively. He followed up on obscure leads from neighboring counties, examined minor inconsistencies and alibis, and even checked commercial records for transactions Emily might have made before disappearing. Every detail mattered. Every fragment could be the thread that unraveled decades of silence. Yet the deeper he dug, the more the landscape of the mystery stretched, revealing voids where answers should have been. Community reactions evolved into a quiet tension, a collective memory of unresolved fear. The downtown shops stayed open later than usual, but residents moved quickly through them, eyes alert, ears tuned for unusual noises. Parks were less frequented after sunset. Parents walked children home earlier, clutching hands with unspoken urgency. Emily Keller's disappearance had become a lens through which every small anomaly was magnified. The town was not paranoid. It was vigilant, aware that an absence could be deliberate, precise, calculated. The cold case had imprinted itself into the rhythms of daily life, a subtle but persistent shadow shaping perception. As time passed, the concept of a resolution began to feel distant, almost theoretical. For Monroe, the detective whose career had become inseparable from the case, every day, without progress, was a weight. Every forgotten lead a point of personal failure. He kept files organized, notes meticulously detailed, revisited the Foggy Nights sequence repeatedly in his mind. Each theory was tested and discarded, each scenario modeled and broken down. The absence of concrete evidence became a presence itself, an unyielding wall against which all investigation efforts collided. Emily Keller existed now as an idea as much as a person, a puzzle without solution, a question without answer, a life paused indefinitely. Years passed, and Dayton learned to carry the story quietly. The cold case became a touchstone for whispered warnings, a measure of caution when discussing strange occurrences, a background hum in conversations about safety and community. Monroe, older, still followed new technologies, attended seminars on emerging forensic methods, and imagined how the night of Emily Keller's disappearance might be reconstructed with the tools he would never have had in 1989. Each innovation offered hope, but also a cruel reminder of the years lost, the decades in which the truth was inaccessible. The cold case was no longer just a file. It had become an integral, haunting presence in the town's psyche, a puzzle that refused resolution, a silence that spoke louder than any confession ever could. As the years slipped by, Emily Keller's absence settled into the town like an uninvited guest. Dayton's streets retained their ordinary rhythm, but beneath the surface, the cold case had carved invisible grooves into every routine. Shopkeepers remembered her face in passing. Pedestrians recalled fleeting moments of her laughter echoing from the park, and the maple tree by her apartment seemed to stretch taller, heavier, burdened with memory. The foggy nights of October 1989 became legend, stories told in low tones at diner counters, in hushed corners of barrooms, over coffee and cautious glances. Each retelling carried a slightly different version, some details lost, others exaggerated, yet all retaining the core terror. A woman vanished, and no one knew how, why, or who. Detective Monroe remained tethered to the case, even as new personnel joined the department. Younger officers fresh from the academy were instructed on the nuances of cold case management, how to read between statements, how to recognize patterns in absence, how to treat every forgotten hint as a potential breakthrough. Monroe guided them, but his eyes always lingered on the photograph of Emily taped to the wall in his office, her gaze arresting, her smile frozen in a moment she would never resume. The photograph was a talisman, a challenge, a reminder of the limits of time and the necessity of vigilance. Each day, without progress, deepened the line between obsession and duty, yet he pressed on, driven by a mixture of professional rigor and personal unwillingness to accept finality. By 1991, the precinct had attempted several reinvestigations. New leads were scarce. Witnesses were re-interviewed, their recollections strained by years and colored by evolving memories. Monroe reviewed old canvases, checked obscure records, revisited minute details with painstaking care. The phone call records, once thought mundane, were reanalyzed. Every possible connection, financial transactions, travel, acquaintances, was examined. Some tips came from strangers who claimed to have seen a figure along the riverbanks late at night, a man or a woman moving silently, almost spectral. Others came from acquaintances who vaguely remembered Emily mentioning plans, meetings, or odd occurrences the week she disappeared. Nothing concrete emerged. Each lead dissolved into uncertainty, leaving the detectives circling a central void. The community's anxiety shifted into a quiet vigilance, a pervasive undercurrent that permeated daily life. Parents accompanied their children to and from school, noting every shadow, listening for every unusual noise. Neighborhood groups convened in living rooms and on porches, comparing observations, memories, and hunches. Stories of flickering lights along the river, unidentifiable footsteps at dusk, and unfamiliar cars parked at odd intervals became part of the social fabric, a living echo of the unresolved tragedy. Emily Keller's disappearance was no longer a headline. It was an atmosphere, a weight on collective attention, a subtle anxiety threading through otherwise ordinary interactions. Monroe, driven by instinct as much as procedure, often retraced Emily's presumed path. He walked the riverbanks at night, flashlights slicing through mist, scanning tree lines, muddy banks, and shadows cast by streetlights. The fog thickened around him, curling like fingers around his ankles, swallowing sound, distorting shapes. In the darkness, his mind constructed scenarios, a struggle quickly silenced, a vehicle waiting, a hand guiding, or perhaps a lone figure moving with intent and calculation. The absence of physical evidence was both frustrating and chilling. The case seemed engineered to evade capture, meticulously orchestrated, leaving only traces in the imagination and memory of those who had known her. By 1992, technological limitations compounded the frustration. DNA analysis existed, but was slow and selective. Fingerprints offered little, as there was no crime scene beyond a vacant apartment. Surveillance was nearly non-existent. Monroe and his team relied on human memory, intuition, and painstaking documentation. Each conversation, each note, each interaction became a potential clue, a thread to follow in the labyrinth of uncertainty. Even the smallest inconsistency, an address misremembered, a call logged incorrectly, a timeline shifted by minutes, was scrutinized with obsessive attention. The cold case had become an exercise in pattern recognition, a challenge between the predictability of human behavior and the unpredictability of absence. Meanwhile, the social and cultural ripples of the disappearance expanded. Local schools included discussions about safety and vigilance. Media outlets occasionally revisited the case, generating renewed interest but rarely producing actionable leads. Monroe observed how rumor and memory intertwined. Townsfolk speculated endlessly. Could she have left voluntarily? Was there a stranger lurking in the neighborhood? Did someone close to her know more than they admitted? These speculations were often contradictory, yet each carried weight. Each could not be dismissed outright. The absence of Emily Keller had created an alternate reality in Dayton, where what might have been, what could have been, and what possibly was all existed simultaneously, overlapping and unresolved. The investigation's stagnation weighed heavily on Monroe. Years of careful attention, meticulous documentation, and unrelenting pursuit of leads had yielded no resolution. Each anniversary of her disappearance brought a swell of unease, reminders of mortality and the tenuous grasp humans have on certainty. The precinct's files expanded, boxes of notes, photographs, and records growing like silent witnesses to a crime that defied closure. Monroe pored over them nightly, cross-referencing, creating timelines, hypothesizing, and discarding countless scenarios. The detective's mind became a map of absences, each blank space a potential locus of truth, each inconsistency a shadow harboring secrets. By 1993, new investigative tools offered glimmers of hope. Forensic advances allowed for more precise examination of old evidence. Hairs, fibers, and trace materials collected at the apartment were reanalyzed. Monroe submitted them to laboratories with emerging technology, waiting for the smallest hint that might pierce decades of silence. Yet the results were inconclusive, each report a reminder of how much time had eroded possibilities. The cold case remained, a monument to patience, perseverance, and a haunting persistence of what was missing. The community's attention waned and resurged sporadically. Each minor clue reported by a citizen was amplified in whispers and local gossip. Flyers resurfaced on bulletin boards, photographs resurfaced in newspaper columns, and tips trickled in, most ultimately leading nowhere. The cold case had assumed a dual existence, dormant in official capacity, yet active in the town's subconscious, a lingering presence influencing decisions, perceptions, and a collective sense of security. Residents described an invisible tension, a quiet vigilance born from the unresolved disappearance, an awareness that events long past could still ripple through their lives unpredictably. By 1994, Monroe had developed a network of colleagues and former detectives who continued to consult on the case, pooling knowledge across counties, sharing insights from similar disappearances. The network reviewed alibis, revisited witness statements, and examined potential patterns across decades. Each meeting produced hypotheses that either fizzled under scrutiny or sparked renewed, though fleeting, optimism. The detective realized that solving the cold case would require a synthesis of old-fashioned legwork, emerging technology, and sheer persistence. Every conversation, every record, every subtle clue was now amplified, each potential breakthrough scrutinized with renewed intensity. Despite the lack of concrete leads, the human element remained central. Families of missing persons, advocacy groups, and neighbors formed informal networks to support the ongoing investigation. Emotional testimonies, recollections of minor behaviors, patterns of routine, and even fleeting remarks overheard years ago were compiled into dossiers, a human map of a life disrupted. Monroe's team understood that while technology could aid in analysis, the essence of the case rested in human memory, perception, and endurance. The cold case was less about the crime than about navigating decades of human experience, piecing together a reality obscured by time, emotion, and absence. By late 1994, the detective recognized a chilling pattern in the reports of sightings and unusual activity. Subtle details, cars parked at odd times, lights flickering in uninhabited buildings, figures glimpsed moving with intent along the river, hinted at an intelligence orchestrating absence. Each observation alone seemed insignificant, but together they suggested method, precision, and patience. Whoever was responsible had planned meticulously, acted decisively, and then disappeared into the folds of ordinary life. Monroe could not dismiss the possibility that Emily Keller's disappearance was not random, not chaotic, but carefully engineered to avoid detection, leaving a community suspended in unresolved tension. The cold case of 1989, once a headline, had become a specter, haunting the collective consciousness of Dayton. Children who had grown up hearing the story internalized the fear, neighbors adjusted routines, and Monroe lived in a constant state of anticipation, waiting for the thread that might finally unravel the mystery. Each year, the anniversary passed quietly yet uncomfortably, a reminder that some truths resist immediate revelation, that absence carries weight, that silence can be as deliberate as action. Dayton was no longer just a city. It had become a landscape of vigilance, memory, and unresolved questions, a town shadowed by the echo of a life that had vanished, yet remained vividly, painfully, unforgettable. By 1995, Emily Keller's disappearance had long ceased to make front-page news, yet Dayton's streets carried the invisible weight of unresolved fear. The town had learned to navigate its routines with caution, eyes flicking to shadowed alleys, ears straining for the faintest anomaly. Detective Monroe, now in his 26th year on the force, remained tethered to the case. The photograph of Emily on his office wall had faded slightly around the edges, but her gaze still held him captive, a reminder that absence can be more powerful than presence. Every tip, every minor recollection, every whispered suspicion was logged meticulously, cataloged, and cross-referenced. The cold case was no longer a file. It was a living organism, shifting, adapting, resisting closure. The investigators began to notice patterns that had previously been overlooked. Reports of strange lights along the river at night, once dismissed as ordinary reflections or passing vehicles, form a loose lattice of repeated occurrences. Anonymous calls hinted at unusual behaviors, fleeting glimpses of a figure in dark clothing, moving silently through neighborhoods, always distant enough to remain unconfirmed. Monroe revisited old interviews, probing for inconsistencies, re-examining alibis, noting minor discrepancies in timing, phrasing, and emotion. He compiled timelines, diagrams, and maps, overlaying them with physical evidence, however sparse. Each connection felt tentative, yet tantalizing. The cold case was teasing the edges of revelation, dangling the possibility of breakthrough just beyond reach. Meanwhile, the community remained quietly haunted. Parents who once whispered warnings to children in passing now recounted the story as a lived memory, a cautionary tale embedded in local culture. Children who had grown up hearing about Emily's disappearance carried an inherited vigilance. Small townsfolk described how even ordinary occurrences, an unfamiliar car parked too long, lights on in an empty house, a lone figure walking after dark, triggered reflexive alarm. The foggy riverbank where Emily had last been seen became a locus of fear and fascination, a site where imagination and memory coalesced into a spectral presence. Dayton existed in duality, ordinary in daylight, haunted in shadows. In 1996, Monroe revisited the apartment where Emily had lived, now empty and repurposed, the walls painted over, the furniture removed. Yet in his mind, the space remained unchanged, a frozen tableau of that fateful night. He reconstructed the scene repeatedly, her routine, the positions of objects, the timing of lights and sounds. He imagined possible intrusions, the precision required to remove someone so seamlessly, the presence of a hand guiding her into silence. Each scenario was tested against known facts, but the absence of definitive evidence made every reconstruction speculative. The detective's mind became a simulation chamber, running parallel timelines, evaluating probabilities, tracing footsteps that may never have existed, listening to whispers of events unrecorded. The investigation extended outward, encompassing neighborhoods, workplaces, social circles. Monroe contacted former coworkers, friends, and even casual acquaintances, sifting for memories that might have escaped scrutiny. Conversations were revisited multiple times, each telling reinterpreted for nuance. A glance exchanged, a phrase spoken, a hesitation noted. Each became a potential clue. The cold case had evolved into a study of human behavior under uncertainty. Detectives learned that what wasn't said could be as revealing as spoken testimony. Subtle cues, overlooked for years, were now scrutinized under the lens of accumulated experience and relentless obsession. As 1997 approached, technological advances provided a flicker of hope. DNA analysis, though still developing, offered tools that could re-examine evidence collected nearly a decade prior. Hair samples, fibers, and trace material found in the apartment were sent to laboratories equipped with new techniques. Monroe waited for results with a combination of hope and dread, aware that decades of delay might have rendered the evidence inconclusive. Yet the possibility of finally piercing the shroud of mystery kept the investigation alive. The cold case was no longer a stagnant file. It was a living puzzle, a challenge demanding every ounce of skill, intuition, and patience the detective could summon. Meanwhile, the town's psyche shifted in subtle ways. Residents internalized the story, weaving it into their understanding of danger and vigilance. Public spaces were perceived differently. The river, once a site of leisurely walks, now represented potential peril. Alleyways, once trivial, now held the potential for unseen threats. The psychological imprint of Emily's disappearance shaped behaviors and perceptions. Every minor anomaly in the neighborhood, the creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a light, the sudden silence of a dog, was magnified, interpreted through the lens of unresolved trauma. Dayton had become a town forever negotiating with absence. Monroe's nights were consumed with reflection and analysis. In the precinct, he pored over the growing stack of files, reconstructing events minute by minute, cross-referencing every detail, every witness statement, every rumor. He traced the timeline of her last known movements, overlaying it with environmental factors, fog patterns, lighting, pedestrian traffic, vehicular activity. Each data point, no matter how small, was considered. The detective's mind operated as both chronologist and profiler, attempting to map human behavior against an absence that refused to yield. The cold case was more than an investigation. It was an exercise in mental endurance, a war against uncertainty and entropy. In early 1997, a breakthrough came, not from physical evidence, but from memory. A woman who had been a neighbor of Emily recalled, after years of suppression, a conversation that seemed trivial at the time, but now hinted at concealed knowledge. She described seeing a man near the river, unusually tense, glancing over his shoulder as if aware of being watched. The detail, previously deemed inconsequential, aligned with other minor reports collected over the years. Monroe and his team revisited these accounts, correlating them, attempting to reconstruct a pattern. The convergence of these observations suggested not randomness, but intention, precision, and knowledge of the town's routines. The disappearance was not merely a vanishing. It was a calculated act, executed with forethought and discipline. The cold case's persistence shaped law enforcement practice in Dayton. Standard protocols were revised, emphasizing the importance of documenting every detail, even those initially perceived as trivial. Memory preservation, systematic re-interviewing, and careful observation became key strategies. Monroe and his colleagues developed new checklists, cross-referencing techniques, and communication channels with other counties to identify patterns across cases. The 1989 disappearance became both a cautionary tale and a blueprint for handling similar investigations. It exemplified how absence itself can be a weapon, and how human perception and memory must be managed meticulously to approach resolution. Community folklore intertwined with factual memory. Emily Keller became a symbol, a specter, a cautionary figure whose story blended with urban legend. Children whispered her name. Adults referenced her in casual conversation, and every unexplained noise, fleeting shadow, or strange occurrence was filtered through the lens of her unresolved disappearance. The town existed in a state of perpetual awareness, balancing ordinary life against the possibility that danger, precise and calculated, lingered unseen. The cold case had become an internal rhythm, a heartbeat of vigilance, shaping social behavior, expectation, and perception of safety. Monroe, steadfast in his pursuit, considered the long-term implications of unresolved cases. He studied previous disappearances, correlated behavioral patterns, and weighed probabilities against intuition. The investigation had evolved from a search for a missing person into a profound exploration of human behavior, social networks, and the unpredictable consequences of absence. The cold case demanded cognitive endurance, forcing the detective to inhabit multiple perspectives, anticipate potential scenarios, and interpret incomplete data with both scientific rigor and human empathy. Every night, the photograph on his wall reminded him of the stakes. Emily Keller was not merely a file or a case number. She was a life suspended, a question left unanswered, and a challenge to every assumption he had about crime, memory, and human action. As 1997 progressed, subtle shifts in pattern recognition provided new avenues of exploration. Small anomalies, once dismissed, were reconsidered. A vehicle noted by a witness, an overlooked detail in a neighbor's report, a slight inconsistency in routine movements. Each data point was recontextualized against the backdrop of accumulated knowledge. Monroe hypothesized potential escape routes, possible helpers, and the psychology of the person responsible. The cold case was no longer a linear investigation, but a multidimensional mapping of action, intent, and absence. Every detail mattered. Every whisper might hide a revelation. every shadow could conceal a clue. Dayton remained outwardly unchanged, yet the town was in essence a living repository of the unresolved, an organism shaped by the absence of one person and the persistence of uncertainty. By 1998, Dayton had aged with Emily Keller's absence, streets familiar yet forever tinged with unease. Detective Monroe, still relentless, traced the patterns of old tips, cross-referencing every whisper, every minor observation that had once seemed irrelevant. The river, where shadows had been glimpsed, became a grid of focus points. Trees, streetlights, benches, every fixture cataloged, measured, analyzed. Even the fog itself was noted for its frequency, density, and effect on visibility. Years of observation had taught Monroe that precision was paramount, that absence itself could be engineered, manipulated, and weaponized by someone who understood the town's rhythms. The pattern wasn't random. It was intentional, patient, calculated. In January, a tip came from an unusual source, a truck driver who passed through Dayton almost nightly, traversing back roads along the outskirts. He claimed he'd seen a figure moving near a warehouse on the edge of town, an individual he described as meticulous, glancing around constantly, carrying something large and indistinct. Monroe listened carefully, noting the time, the conditions, and the exact route. The description aligned with multiple previous reports. A figure present at night, always distant, never interacting, a shadow in the fog. Something about the consistency suggested the person responsible was methodical, perhaps revisiting areas with purpose, marking territory or confirming absence, ensuring nothing escaped observation. Monroe re-examined old evidence with fresh eyes. Hairs, fibers, and dust samples collected from Emily's apartment in 1989 were sent to an upgraded lab capable of detecting microtraces that previously went unnoticed. Results trickled in slowly. Some strands matched, no known profiles. Fibers suggested industrial fabrics, possibly work clothing, hinting at a person who had operated with precision, possibly familiar with technical labor or outdoor environments. Monroe noted correlations. The type of clothing, the behaviors reported, the timing of sightings. The evidence was subtle, nearly invisible, but it painted a shadow of a presence that had skillfully orchestrated Emily's disappearance. The cold case was slowly taking shape again, contours emerging from years of fog and silence. The community, meanwhile, had settled into a tense coexistence with memory. Local bars, diners, and grocery stores carried the undercurrent of the unsolved mystery. Residents spoke in low tones, sometimes joking, sometimes warning. Children who had once been terrified now treated the story as folklore, but adults remembered vividly the fear, the uncertainty, the vigilance that colored daily life. Windows stayed lit, doors remained locked, strangers were scrutinized. Every minor anomaly, doors ajar, unusual vehicles, unexplained sounds, was interpreted as part of the unseen presence of the person who had taken Emily. The cold case had become a silent infrastructure of anxiety, a framework shaping perceptions, behavior, and trust. By mid-1998, Monroe began to pursue previously neglected lines of inquiry. Backgrounds of acquaintances, distant relatives, and employees in sectors linked to fiber samples and industrial clothing were reviewed. Payroll records, work schedules, travel logs, and personal histories were scrutinized. Any deviation, no matter how minor, became a potential lead. The detective's methodology had evolved. He was no longer chasing Emily's absence in isolation, but examining the broader network of human movement, occupational patterns, and environmental interactions that could provide a glimpse into the mind behind the disappearance. The cold case was not merely a search for a person, but a study of an entire ecosystem of opportunity and concealment. In September, another clue emerged from a surprising angle. A former neighbor recalled a series of deliveries to Emily's building that had seemed unusual at the time. Packages addressed ambiguously, dropped off late at night, quickly removed. Combined with the truck driver's sightings and subtle environmental cues, a pattern began to emerge. Someone operating in precise, limited windows, moving with intent, interacting minimally, leaving traces that were easily overlooked. Monroe began constructing a spatial map overlaying reported sightings, delivery schedules, and neighborhood features. Each intersection suggested purpose, knowledge, and forethought. The presence was no longer entirely theoretical. It had shape, trajectory, and rhythm. The detective expanded the search perimeter beyond the original apartment block. Abandoned warehouses, riverbanks, storage facilities, and industrial complexes were revisited. Each area was analyzed for access points, patterns of traffic, and potential hiding spaces. Nighttime surveillance, once minimal, was intensified. Monroe personally monitored key areas, flashlights slicing through mist, eyes adjusting to shapes and movement that often dissolved upon closer inspection. Each sound, each flicker of motion was scrutinized. The atmosphere of fear persisted, but now it was coupled with the excitement of tangible leads, threads that might finally unravel the mystery. By late 1998, advancements in forensic science provided additional hope. Trace DNA analysis had reached new precision. Hairs and fibers collected years earlier were retested, and minute cellular material revealed faint, previously undetectable matches to known populations. Monroe compiled the findings, integrating them into behavioral profiles, geographic patterns, and occupational possibilities. Each small match strengthened the hypothesis of a calculated, informed individual who had operated with knowledge of environmental factors and human patterns. The cold case was becoming a mosaic of tiny, persistent details coalescing into a coherent, though still incomplete, picture. As the investigation intensified, Monroe encountered resistance and fatigue within the department. Years of inactivity had bred skepticism among colleagues. Newer officers questioned the value of pursuing a case over a decade old, yet the detectives' persistence inspired a small cadre of committed staff. They devoted nights and weekends to interviews, re-examination of evidence, and detail mapping. Community volunteers provided insights, occasional tips, and local knowledge, bridging gaps in surveillance and observation. Dayton had become a hybrid landscape of official scrutiny and communal vigilance, a town mobilized around an absence that refused resolution. By early 1999, the first glimmers of breakthrough emerged. Subtle connections between minor sightings, fiber evidence, and occupational possibilities suggested a narrowed field of potential suspects. Monroe and his team initiated targeted interviews, often revisiting individuals who had provided peripheral information years earlier. Questions were carefully phrased, designed to test memory, reaction, and subtle inconsistencies. The process was painstaking, but slowly, patterns began to solidify. The cold case was shifting from theoretical conjecture to actionable intelligence. The detective sensed a closing gap between decades of absence and the possibility of truth. The psychological weight of the investigation pressed on Monroe. Each day carried the dual burden of hope and dread. The town, meanwhile, absorbed the renewed activity in silence. Residents observed the influx of detectives, the subtle changes in law enforcement presence, and the occasional flurry of media attention with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. For many, the story of Emily Keller had become a defining element of local consciousness, a reminder that the past could persist, unresolved, influencing the present. Every new lead, every re-examination of evidence, was a potential rupture in that uneasy equilibrium. By the end of 1999, technological, procedural, and human insights converged. Trace evidence, behavioral profiling, and witness recollections coalesced into a more coherent picture. Patterns emerged that had eluded detection for a decade, hinting at the presence of an individual or group capable of meticulous, patient, and precise execution. The cold case had become a study in subtlety, absence as a deliberate act, silence as a tool, and time as both ally and obstacle. Monroe realized that resolution, while still distant, was now within the realm of possibility. The town's fear, once amorphous, could now be confronted with strategy, determination, and science. By the close of 2000, Emily Keller's disappearance had evolved from a headline into a complex network of human behavior, environmental mapping, and forensic challenge. Monroe remained relentless, driven by the awareness that the window of opportunity for resolution was narrowing as witnesses aged, memories faded, and physical evidence deteriorated. The cold case was no longer simply about Emily Keller. It had become a testament to persistence, to the interplay between human observation, technological capability, and the inexorable passage of time. Dayton's streets, once merely scenic, were now embedded with the echoes of the missing, the vigilance of the community, and the anticipation of the breakthrough that hung, tantalizingly, on the horizon. The early 2000s brought subtle but profound shifts in the long-dormant Emily Keller case. By 2001, Detective Monroe had accumulated over a decade of meticulous notes, observations, and re-interviews, and yet the cold case remained maddeningly unsolved. Each new forensic advance, each tip, each memory recalled by witnesses offered hope, yet the challenge remained constant. How could a disappearance so deliberate, so precise, have left almost no trace? The city of Dayton had aged along with the investigation, streets carrying their ordinary rhythm overlaid with a subtle, persistent tension. Children had grown into teenagers, adults into middle age, yet the shadow of that foggy October night of 1989 remained etched in every corner, in every whispered memory, in every nervous glance cast at the riverbanks. By March of 2001, Monroe and his team began revisiting minor details that had previously seemed inconsequential. Deliveries to Emily's building, once dismissed as ordinary, were examined with renewed scrutiny. Precise times, recurring patterns, and the identities of the delivery personnel were logged, compared against known schedules, and overlaid on maps of the surrounding streets. Something almost imperceptible emerged, a rhythm, a pattern, a presence that was consistent, deliberate, and methodical. Whoever had orchestrated Emily's disappearance understood the flow of the neighborhood, the habits of its residents, and the blind spots in local surveillance. Absence had become an art form, a calculated silence designed to evade detection. Monroe recognized, as he had long suspected, that he was no longer chasing randomness. He was tracing intention, patient and relentless. New forensic technologies, refined in the years since 1989, allowed laboratories to detect trace amounts of DNA that had been imperceptible to earlier tests. Hairs and fibers collected from Emily's apartment and nearby areas were resubmitted for analysis, revealing faint matches that hinted at occupational clothing, possible industrial environments, and unique habits. Monroe pored over the results, overlaying them with prior witness statements and minor observations. Each detail, while seemingly insignificant on its own, coalesced into a portrait of a methodical individual with a precise understanding of human patterns, environmental variables, and timing. The cold case had begun to take shape not as a single puzzle piece, but as a composite of patterns, behaviors, and subtle evidence. The community's vigilance persisted. Parents still called children home early. Neighbors noted unusual vehicles and figures after dark, and conversations often drifted back to Emily Keller, even as the story receded from newspapers. Dayton had internalized the narrative of absence, weaving it into local consciousness. Streets, parks, and riverbanks became sites of calculated awareness. Everyday sounds, a door closing too softly, a shadow that lingered too long, a light flickering unexpectedly, were magnified in the lens of a decade-long unresolved disappearance. Residents spoke quietly to one another about the Keller case, recognizing that its unresolved nature had left a subtle, persistent mark on behavior, perception, and social interactions. By 2002, Monroe had developed a broader understanding of patterns across missing person cases in neighboring counties. A network of retired detectives, colleagues, and law enforcement professionals became involved, sharing insights, reviewing old records, and identifying similar behaviors. Minor patterns emerged. Individuals operating with precision, exploiting local knowledge, and disappearing from the radar after careful planning. Monroe integrated these insights with his own decades of investigation, generating profiles, timelines, and behavioral hypotheses. Each lead was carefully tested, discarded if inconsistent, reinforced if validated. The cold case, once limited to Emily Keller, now resonated with a broader understanding of human behavior, opportunity, and intentional absence. By mid-2003, Monroe and his team had begun systematic surveillance of locations identified through pattern analysis. Riverbanks, abandoned warehouses, industrial complexes, and delivery points became focal areas. Nighttime surveillance, once sporadic, intensified. Monroe often stood in the mist, flashlight cutting through fog, watching for any movement that matched historical patterns, any anomaly that might suggest the responsible party's continued presence. The anticipation was palpable, a tension that threaded through the department, the community, and the detective himself. Every sound, shadow, and reflection was considered, measured, and logged. A breakthrough emerged in late 2003, not from surveillance, but from testimony. A witness, recalling details suppressed for years, identified a vehicle parked unusually near Emily's former apartment the night she disappeared. Combined with prior sightings of a lone figure near the river, this information narrowed the field of potential suspects. Monroe cross-referenced employment records, delivery schedules, and behavioral patterns, constructing a web of connections that had previously gone unnoticed. The meticulous, deliberate nature of the disappearance became increasingly clear. Emily Keller's vanishing was no accident, no impulsive act. It was the product of calculated knowledge, patience, and observation. Monroe's strategy shifted from broad analysis to targeted investigation. Interviews were revisited with renewed focus, subtle inconsistencies were highlighted, and minor recollections were treated as potential breakthroughs. Each data point was cross-checked with environmental and temporal variables. The detective's obsessive attention to detail, his ability to synthesize decades of information, became critical. Slowly, the threads began to converge, revealing a pattern that suggested proximity, opportunity, and access, creating a framework within which the perpetrator might finally be identified. The town's sense of unease remained, but a new layer of anticipation emerged. Locals noted increased activity from law enforcement, subtle inquiries from detectives revisiting old relationships, and occasional visits from experts in forensics. The cold case had reanimated the town's consciousness, drawing attention back to the unresolved absence. Children who had grown up hearing the story of Emily Keller were now old enough to contribute observations previously unnoticed. Adults shared memories, small habits, and minor anomalies. The community itself had become a resource, a living repository of fragmented recollection, patience, and insight. By early 2004, Monroe and his team began cross-referencing the newly consolidated data with forensic advancements. Tiny fragments of DNA, previously considered inconclusive, were re-examined with more sensitive equipment. Patterns of behavior suggested calculated surveillance of Emily's routines, precise knowledge of neighborhood rhythms, and deliberate exploitation of blind spots in the environment. Each observation, previously isolated, now interconnected in a lattice of intent. The detective realized that resolution was not only possible, it was imminent, dependent on connecting these discrete elements into a coherent narrative. The cold case, once a dormant file, had become a living investigation, a multidimensional mapping of absence, presence, and human behavior. Monroe's approach reflected decades of experience, systematic documentation, meticulous observation, and integration of human, environmental, and forensic data. The subtlety of the perpetrator's actions demanded patience, precision, and the willingness to consider long-term patterns rather than immediate, superficial evidence. Emily Keller's disappearance, while unresolved for over a decade, had left behind a trail of faint but persistent traces, each waiting to be interpreted, connected, and understood. By late 2004, the contours of the investigation were clear. The pattern of meticulous planning, environmental knowledge, and temporal precision had been mapped. Witness accounts, forensic analysis, and observational data coalesced into a tentative but actionable profile. Monroe knew the breakthrough was approaching, though the final piece remained elusive. The community, still quietly vigilant, watched for signs, rumors, and whispers, unaware that the culmination of years of painstaking investigation was drawing near. Dayton existed in a suspended state, balancing ordinary life against the impending revelation that would finally confront the absence, the uncertainty, and the silence that had defined the last 15 years. By 2005, Dayton had become a city marked by shadows, subtle, persistent reminders of the unresolved. Detective Monroe, now well into the second decade of his pursuit, walked familiar streets with a tension that never eased. The riverbanks, empty warehouses, and the silent alleyways seemed charged, as if the past had left a tangible residue. Emily Keller's disappearance was no longer merely a headline or a cold case file. It was a presence, haunting the town, influencing behaviors, shaping patterns, dictating caution in small, nearly imperceptible ways. Residents had learned to move with quiet vigilance, noticing anomalies that had once been invisible, internalizing the absence that defined a decade and a half of uncertainty. Monroe's investigation had evolved into a complex system of cross-referenced observations, behavioral profiling, and forensic mapping. Advances in DNA technology and trace evidence analysis offered unprecedented clarity. Fibers collected from Emily's apartment, once thought generic, revealed subtle patterns. Industrial threads suggesting work in maintenance, shipping, or manufacturing. Trace residues hinting at movement across riverbanks, warehouses, and roads rarely traveled. Hairs were analyzed for mitochondrial DNA, confirming species, hair type, and potential geographical linkage. Each new layer of detail offered Monroe a sharper lens through which to reconstruct events that had unfolded 15 years earlier. The cold case, long dormant, had been reanimated with precision, patience, and scientific rigor. The community remained entwined in the narrative of absence. Conversations, once casual, now reflected subtle awareness. Shopkeepers glanced at strangers with recognition born of years of collective memory. Parents monitored children with a combination of caution and inherited vigilance. Alleyways and parks were no longer merely spaces of recreation. They were stages upon which the memory of disappearance lingered, an invisible watch over the living. Each sighting reported in prior years, every anonymous tip, and every recollection of unusual activity formed a lattice of human perception, informing Monroe's ongoing efforts. Dayton existed in a dual reality, ordinary in daylight, haunted under shadow, a town aware that absence carries weight. In mid-2005, a series of minor breakthroughs converged. A former delivery driver, long retired, recalled dropping packages near Emily's building at times that now aligned with previously unexplained patterns. His recollection of routes, timing, and an occasional dark-haired man moving swiftly through the parking lot coincided with other witness statements. Monroe cross-referenced this data with surveillance photographs, weather records, and local traffic reports from 1989. A map emerged, highlighting specific areas of interest, alleyways, river access points, and industrial side streets that allowed movement unseen. Patterns of movement suggested intent, strategy, and knowledge, an understanding of the town's rhythms that could only have been acquired through familiarity or meticulous planning. By 2006, Monroe had expanded his analysis to include peripheral connections, employment records, delivery logs, vehicle registrations, and patterns of residence. Even minor irregularities, a new tenant in a warehouse, a worker absent on critical nights, a vehicle rerouted, were scrutinized. The detective's methods had become a synthesis of observation, statistical mapping, and human behavioral analysis. Each anomaly was cross-referenced against historical data, creating an intricate web of potential connections. The cold case, which had once seemed impenetrable, was slowly yielding to sustained attention, technological enhancement, and methodical reconstruction. The community's subconscious engagement intensified. Residents noted renewed law enforcement activity, vehicles parked near historical points of interest, and subtle questioning from detectives revisiting old witnesses. Ordinary life continued, yet under the surface was a collective awareness that resolution might be near. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, anxiety, and the ghostly memory of Emily Keller's presence, or absence, in every corner of the town. Dayton existed in this tension, caught between routine and the pull of long-buried truth. Monroe's focus turned to reconstructing the night of October 1989 in minute detail. Every known movement, sound, and interaction was cataloged and analyzed. Footprints along the riverbank, previously dismissed as insignificant, were re-examined with the aid of soil analysis and pattern recognition. Light sources, street lamps, apartment windows, passing vehicles were mapped against movement patterns, allowing for hypothetical reconstructions of lines of sight and potential interception points. Minor sounds recorded in logs, dogs barking, doors closing, footsteps, were cross-referenced with environmental data. Each variable, while individually inconsequential, combined into a lattice suggesting opportunity, sequence, and timing. The cold case became a study in precision absence, an intricate puzzle where every shadow mattered. By late 2006, a significant thread emerged. Cross-referencing DNA results from trace evidence with occupational profiles suggested a narrowed subset of potential suspects. Combined with witness recollections and behavioral patterns, Monroe identified individuals who had opportunity, knowledge, and access. The detective initiated discrete inquiries, testing alibis, questioning inconsistencies, and observing reactions. Each subtle cue, hesitation, over-detailing, micro-expressions, was logged, analyzed, and compared against historical behavior patterns. The cold case, long defined by absence and uncertainty, now had direction, a vector toward potential resolution. The psychological strain on Monroe and his team was immense. Years of unrelenting focus, coupled with the persistent awareness of a community affected by fear, created a tension that was almost palpable. Yet the potential for resolution reinvigorated their efforts. The town's collective consciousness, long shaped by Emily Keller's absence, now aligned subtly with the investigation. Renewed tips from residents, recollections of overlooked details, and peripheral observations provided additional data points. Dayton was both observer and participant in the unfolding effort to bring clarity to the shadow that had loomed for over 15 years. Early 2007 brought another convergence of evidence. Trace DNA from fibers, eyewitness testimony, and occupational analysis suggested not only proximity, but repeated presence in the areas surrounding Emily's apartment and riverbanks. Behavioral analysis indicated planning, strategic patience, and awareness of law enforcement procedures. The detective recognized a calculated mind, a meticulous orchestrator, someone who understood the nuances of human behavior and environmental manipulation. Monroe's office became a hub of synthesis. Charts, maps, witness statements, and lab results filled every surface, interconnected in a lattice of emerging clarity. The cold case had evolved from a series of fragmented recollections into a coherent, though incomplete, framework. By mid-2007, Monroe understood that the breakthrough required both persistence and strategy. Coordinated surveillance, further witness interviews, and discrete inquiries into occupational and personal histories were implemented. Minor anomalies, patterns of movement, delivery routes, vehicle registrations, were examined against behavioral profiles. The detective recognized that resolution was no longer theoretical. The pieces were aligned, requiring only careful connection to reveal the truth. The cold case, a decade and a half in the making, had transformed into a tangible path toward confrontation, disclosure, and closure. The town, unknowingly, played a subtle role in the unfolding drama. Residents' vigilance, sporadic tips, and recollection of minor anomalies created a living network of data. Dayton, haunted by absence, had become an unwitting ally in piecing together the puzzle. Each shared memory, each observation, each cautious question to a neighbor contributed to the emergent picture. The cold case was no longer static. It was dynamic, evolving through the interplay of science, observation, and community memory. As 2007 drew to a close, Detective Monroe sensed that the culmination of years of meticulous investigation, technological advancement, and subtle community input was approaching. The patterns of behavior, environmental knowledge, and forensic evidence had coalesced to a point where the next step, identifying the perpetrator, was within reach. The shadow that had haunted Dayton for nearly 2 decades was beginning to yield to scrutiny, analysis, and the patient persistence of those who refused to let absence remain unchallenged. By 2008, the Emily Keller case had become the unshakable pulse beneath Dayton's surface, a rhythm of unease that persisted quietly but insistently. Detective Monroe, now more seasoned and unyielding than ever, paced the streets he knew by memory, retracing the sequence of events that had unfolded nearly 2 decades earlier. Each alley, each shadow, each flickering streetlight carried echoes of that October night in 1989, a night when the ordinary had been transformed into the extraordinary, and the disappearance of a single young woman had etched itself into the collective consciousness of an entire town. For Monroe, the case was no longer merely a professional responsibility. It was an obsession, a mission anchored in the tension between absence and truth. Advances in forensic technology had continued to shift the investigative landscape. By 2008, DNA analysis had grown precise enough to detect traces that once seemed hopelessly degraded. Samples from fibers, hair, and dust collected years earlier were reanalyzed, producing faint but conclusive matches to potential suspects whose profiles had been built painstakingly over the previous decade. Monroe pored over the results night after night, aligning them against historical witness statements, minor anomalies noted in the original investigation, and environmental patterns previously mapped around Emily's apartment and the riverbanks where she had been last seen. The evidence, once scattered and ambiguous, began to coalesce into a picture that was precise, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. The human element of the case came into sharper focus as well. Witnesses who had been hesitant or reluctant in earlier years were now approached with care, guided by Monroe's decades of experience in reading subtle cues, microexpressions, and inconsistencies. Each conversation, each recollection, was cataloged and cross-referenced. Minor observations, a glance exchanged, a vehicle parked unusually, a delivery arriving at odd hours, gained significance when viewed in the context of cumulative patterns. It was a slow but relentless process of weaving together fragments of memory, behavior, and environment into a coherent understanding of the orchestrator behind Emily Keller's disappearance. By mid-2008, Monroe had identified a narrowed field of potential suspects, individuals whose movements, occupational patterns, and proximity to Emily's last known location aligned with both witness accounts and forensic evidence. The detective's methodical approach left little to chance. Employment histories were scrutinized, vehicle logs were cross-checked, travel patterns analyzed, and previous interactions cataloged with meticulous precision. Each thread pulled revealed more connections, illuminating the network of opportunity and intent that had remained hidden for nearly 20 years. The cold case was no longer a distant memory. It was a live, breathing puzzle, demanding synthesis, intuition, and patience. Community awareness had evolved in parallel. Dayton residents, long shaped by the shadow of Emily's absence, now noticed subtle patterns of renewed police presence. Surveillance near riverbanks, detectives revisiting locations, discreet interviews with longtime neighbors. Everyday life carried an undercurrent of expectation and unease. Shops, parks, and public spaces became quiet theaters where the memory of absence lingered, and the collective consciousness of the town subtly participated in the reconstruction of a narrative that had eluded resolution for nearly 2 decades. The cold case had embedded itself in the rhythm of daily life, guiding observation and shaping perception in ways both conscious and unconscious. In September 2008, a pivotal breakthrough arrived through an unexpected route. A man, previously peripheral to the case, came forward with information that initially seemed inconsequential, a fleeting observation of a figure near the riverbank in the weeks following Emily's disappearance, recalled with surprising clarity. Monroe immediately cross-referenced the account with prior sightings, delivery records, and known movements of potential suspects. Patterns emerged, previously obscured, suggesting repeated presence and deliberate observation. The detectives' team mapped these movements meticulously, overlaying environmental data, witness statements, and forensic results to build a comprehensive profile of the individual responsible. Every shadow, every minor discrepancy, every forgotten detail gained new weight in the light of this revelation. By late 2008, surveillance and investigative pressure intensified. The narrowed field of suspects allowed Monroe to coordinate discrete observation, monitor patterns, and test alibis with precision. Environmental reconstructions of Emily's apartment, the riverbank, and adjacent streets provided insights into potential access points, movement sequences, and opportunities exploited by the perpetrator. Each discovery added depth to the evolving narrative. The disappearance had not been a spontaneous act, but a carefully executed plan, reliant on knowledge of human behavior, environmental variables, and timing. The cold case, long defined by uncertainty and absence, was now approaching the clarity of resolution. The psychological toll on Monroe was considerable. Decades of relentless focus, the weight of community expectation, and the persistent shadow of an unresolved disappearance created a tension that was both personal and professional. Yet the potential for closure drove him forward, night after night, mile after mile, chart after chart. The detective's office became a sanctuary of patterns, profiles, and forensic data, the walls crowded with maps, timelines, and photographs, each representing a fragment of truth waiting to be reconciled. Dayton, unknowingly, had become an auxiliary participant in this process, the town itself harboring clues, observations, and memories that now converged into actionable intelligence. In early 2009, a breakthrough in DNA processing provided further clarity. Trace material from fibers and hair samples, once inconclusive, now produced matches with statistical significance. These matches aligned with the behavioral and environmental profile Monroe had painstakingly developed over years of analysis. The detective meticulously integrated these findings, connecting them to witness statements and subtle anomalies documented across decades. The portrait that emerged was chillingly precise, a calculated, patient, and knowledgeable individual capable of orchestrating a disappearance with deliberate intent and foresight. The cold case had transformed from a decades-old mystery into a tangible path toward accountability. Monroe coordinated with federal and state agencies to verify leads and confirm connections. Each potential avenue was tested rigorously, ensuring that corroborating evidence was sufficient for potential legal action. Witnesses were re-interviewed, sometimes under new protocols designed to elicit detail previously overlooked. Environmental patterns, traffic records, and occupational schedules were reanalyzed to identify points of convergence. The investigative apparatus, now refined through years of persistence, began to operate with a coherence that had previously been unattainable. The cold case, once a diffuse and frustrating enigma, had crystallized into a framework capable of yielding resolution. Community impact remained profound. The renewed investigation reawakened public memory of Emily Keller's disappearance. Local media coverage, though cautious, reflected the gravity of the approaching breakthrough. Residents began to re-examine their own recollections. Forgotten conversations, overlooked anomalies, and minor patterns of behavior suddenly gained significance. The town itself became a living archive, a repository of evidence and insight, shaping the trajectory of the investigation even as it unfolded. Dayton existed in a heightened state of awareness, a collective witness to the final stages of a case that had defined its identity for nearly 20 years. By mid-2009, Monroe had aligned evidence, behavioral profiles, witness testimony, and forensic results to a point where confidence in identifying the perpetrator was growing. Surveillance, both discreet and strategic, was implemented to observe patterns, confirm whereabouts, and anticipate potential movement. The detective and his team were acutely aware that timing, patience, and precision were critical. Any misstep could allow the responsible party to vanish once again, perpetuating the cycle of absence and fear that had haunted the town for decades. In late 2009, a sequence of events unfolded that would set the stage for the final revelation. A peripheral witness observed suspicious activity consistent with previously documented patterns, triggering a series of coordinated investigative actions. Monroe's team verified environmental conditions, corroborated historical movement patterns, and cross-checked forensic results with occupational and social connections. The puzzle pieces, scattered for nearly 20 years, began to align, forming a coherent and actionable narrative. The detective could sense, with an almost tangible anticipation, that the culmination of decades of effort, observation, and analysis was imminent. By early 2010, all signs pointed to a single individual whose proximity, patterns, and behavioral profile matched every known facet of Emily Keller's disappearance. Monroe, with decades of cumulative experience, prepared for the final stage: confrontation, confirmation, and resolution. The cold case, long defined by absence, uncertainty, and the passage of time, had been transformed into a precise investigative vector, targeting an individual whose careful orchestration had eluded detection for nearly 2 decades. Dayton, unknowingly complicit in the accumulation of evidence through vigilance, memory, and observation, stood on the threshold of closure. By 2010, Dayton carried the weight of Emily Keller's absence like a living, breathing presence. The streets, the alleyways, the riverbanks, all resonated with memories, whispered warnings, and subtle reminders that some disappearances never truly fade. Detective Monroe had been pursuing this cold case for over 20 years, and the culmination of decades of observation, cross-referencing, and forensic analysis was finally approaching a critical point. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the moment when the past would collide with the present. Monroe's office had become a command center for meticulous reconstruction. Maps plastered with pins, lines connecting sightings, photographs annotated with timestamps, and forensic reports stacked in precise order filled every surface. Every detail, no matter how minor, had been cataloged, shadows noted by neighbors, vehicle movements recorded by observant drivers, faint traces of hair and fibers reanalyzed with new DNA technology. Each fragment, once dismissed as insignificant, now formed a lattice of evidence pointing toward a single trajectory. Monroe reviewed the patterns late into the night, aware that one misstep could allow the orchestrator of Emily's disappearance to vanish once more. In early 2010, a series of coordinated interviews brought clarity to previously ambiguous reports. Witnesses, now older and more reflective, recalled subtle anomalies from the night of Emily's disappearance. A door closing silently, a figure glimpsed in peripheral vision, a vehicle parked unusually in the distance. Monroe cross-referenced these accounts with delivery records, environmental reconstructions, and historical traffic data. The patterns were no longer abstract. They were concrete, revealing repeated presence, careful timing, and intimate knowledge of Emily's routines and the neighborhood's rhythms. The cold case, dormant for decades, was alive with precision, each thread tightening around a single individual. Forensic evidence finally provided decisive direction. Trace DNA from fibers and hair, long considered inconclusive, matched samples from a limited pool of potential suspects. Industrial fibers indicated familiarity with maintenance or shipping work. Minute residues hinted at repeated movement through river-adjacent terrain. Behavioral profiling suggested methodical planning, patient observation, and acute awareness of law enforcement patterns. Monroe integrated these insights with witness testimony and environmental mapping, constructing a comprehensive picture of opportunity, intent, and sequence. The cold case was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, actionable, and dangerously close to resolution. The community, largely unaware of the precision unfolding in Monroe's office, experienced subtle signs of renewed tension. Residents noted police presence near previously quiet streets, the occasional interview revisiting old recollections, and discreet surveillance near locations long associated with the disappearance. Conversations, once casual, now carried undercurrents of caution, reflection, and anticipation. Dayton had internalized Emily Keller's absence as part of its identity, and a renewed investigative activity rippled through the town with quiet, almost imperceptible waves of anxiety and hope. By mid-2010, Monroe had identified a primary suspect whose movements, occupational history, and behavioral profile aligned with every piece of corroborated evidence. The detective coordinated with federal and state authorities to verify the findings, ensuring that any potential confrontation would be supported by incontrovertible data. Surveillance was intensified, patterns monitored, and inconsistencies tested. The suspect, aware of minor police activity but unaware of the cumulative evidence, remained active within their routines, oblivious to the narrowing circle of scrutiny. Every step, every observed habit, became a data point, building toward a decisive moment. In August 2010, a minor but pivotal observation tipped the balance. A peripheral witness, recalling a subtle detail from 1989, confirmed the presence of a vehicle near Emily's apartment during the critical time frame. Cross-referenced with employment records and forensic DNA matches, the information solidified Monroe's focus. The suspect's identity, long obscured by decades of careful evasion, now rested on converging evidence, behavioral patterns, occupational access, environmental familiarity, and corroborated forensic findings. The detective recognized that the years of persistence, the painstaking accumulation of detail, and the integration of science and human observation had brought the case to its critical juncture. Monroe coordinated a tactical approach, balancing legal necessity with operational precision. Interviews were structured to elicit subtle responses, environmental conditions recreated to observe reactions, and behavioral inconsistencies carefully documented. Every measure was taken to ensure that the culmination of decades of work would lead to a defensible resolution. The cold case, once defined by absence and uncertainty, now existed as a precise framework capable of yielding confession, arrest, or verification. The town of Dayton, still largely unaware of the imminent breakthrough, experienced a subtle cultural tension. Conversations among neighbors referenced long-forgotten sightings, unusual deliveries, and moments of unease that had once seemed trivial. Children of the late 1980s, now young adults, shared recollections passed down from parents, integrating themselves unwittingly into the emergent narrative. Every subtle observation, every fragment of memory contributed to the tapestry of evidence, shaping the environment in which Monroe's final moves would unfold. By late 2010, surveillance and data analysis converged to confirm the suspect's movements. Patterns of absence and presence were established with forensic precision. Minor deviations from established routines provided additional verification, each anomaly reinforcing the conclusion that the individual had intimate knowledge of Emily Keller's habits, the layout of her neighborhood, and the gaps in law enforcement observation. Monroe's meticulous approach had transformed ambiguity into clarity, turning decades of scattered data into actionable intelligence. The final preparation for confrontation involved coordination across multiple agencies. Every potential variable was anticipated: the suspect's access to escape routes, environmental factors, community interaction, and behavioral tendencies. Monroe understood that the culmination of years of persistence required both patience and decisiveness. The town's long-sustained anxiety, the decades of absence, and the meticulous accumulation of evidence converged toward a moment of potential reckoning. In December 2010, Monroe and his team executed the first stage of direct engagement. The suspect, observed through discreet surveillance, was approached carefully with corroborated evidence. Behavioral responses, subtle expressions, and inconsistencies were documented in real time, confirming the alignment with patterns established over the preceding 21 years. Each observation reinforced the detective's conclusion. The cold case had reached a point where legal, forensic, and behavioral evidence converged. The shadow that had haunted Dayton for over 2 decades was beginning to materialize into accountability. The town, unknowingly, participated in the final act. Residents' recollections, minor observations, and previously overlooked patterns had contributed to the synthesis of evidence. Dayton's streets, buildings, and riverbanks had been silent witnesses, their mundane presence storing the echoes of absence, the subtleties of observation, and the imprint of meticulous planning. The culmination of these decades of vigilance, analysis, and subtle community awareness had coalesced in Monroe's hands, creating a precise pathway toward confrontation. As December 2010 drew to a close, Monroe prepared for the next phase: confirmation through direct evidence, formal interviews, and potential confession. The suspect, now within the convergence of legal and observational scrutiny, remained unaware of the precision and inevitability of the investigative net closing around them. The cold case, long a haunting void in the lives of Dayton residents and the mind of Detective Monroe, was on the brink of resolution. The shadows that had persisted for over 2 decades were finally being illuminated, every detail of absence mapped, every thread of evasion traced, every subtle clue aligned toward a moment that would send shockwaves through the town, ending a chapter defined by mystery, tension, and relentless pursuit. By early 2011, Dayton was a city suspended between memory and revelation. Emily Keller's absence had become woven into its very fabric, a quiet undercurrent in the streets, parks, and riverbanks where life continued with subtle apprehension. Detective Monroe, after more than 21 years of relentless pursuit, was now on the verge of confronting the individual responsible. Every lead, every minor observation, every fragment of forensic evidence had converged into a singular trajectory. The cold case that had haunted Dayton for decades was poised to shift from lingering uncertainty into sudden, shocking clarity. Monroe's preparations were meticulous. Forensic reports were cross-referenced multiple times, witness statements reviewed in full context, and surveillance data analyzed for inconsistencies or confirmations of historical patterns. The suspect's routines were mapped with precision. Work schedules, travel patterns, social interactions, all overlaid with environmental data from the night of Emily's disappearance. The detective knew that the culmination of decades of work demanded exact timing, strategy, and coordination. One misstep could undo years of painstaking effort. The town's unspoken anxiety, though largely unperceived, hung in the air like the fog that had shrouded Emily's apartment that night in October 1989. In February, subtle indicators signaled that the suspect might be aware of the narrowing net. Behavioral anomalies, slight deviations from routines, minor hesitations in conversation, and unexpected movement were observed and cataloged. Monroe noted each detail, treating them not as distractions, but as critical pieces of the puzzle. The detective's decades of experience allowed him to anticipate the suspect's psychological state, understanding that long-term evasion often breeds a combination of caution, arrogance, and inadvertent mistakes. Every observation became a potential key to unlocking the final phase of resolution. The community remained quietly engaged, their awareness of renewed investigative activity tempered by daily life. Yet residents noticed subtle changes. Law enforcement vehicles in unusual locations, detectives revisiting old acquaintances, and renewed interest in previously overlooked spaces. Stories once dismissed as rumor or minor anomaly began to resonate differently in the light of intensive investigation. Dayton existed in a state of latent anticipation, the unspoken acknowledgement that the past was about to intrude upon the present in a manner both shocking and definitive. By spring 2011, Monroe had consolidated a comprehensive behavioral and forensic profile. DNA results, fiber analysis, and trace evidence aligned with eyewitness testimony, occupational histories, and environmental mapping. Patterns of access, timing, and strategic planning suggested an individual who had mastered the art of evasion while maintaining a precise awareness of law enforcement limitations. The detective's synthesis of these disparate elements revealed a calculated mind, a meticulous orchestrator, and someone whose awareness of Emily Keller's routines allowed for flawless concealment over decades. The cold case had finally transitioned from theory into actionable intelligence. In May, Monroe initiated a series of controlled confrontations designed to observe the suspect's reactions without alerting them to the cumulative evidence amassed over more than 20 years. Questions were carefully structured, settings chosen to replicate familiar environments, and behaviors documented with forensic-level precision. Each response, hesitation, and micro-expression was cross-referenced with historical patterns and forensic data, gradually eroding the protective veil of uncertainty that had allowed the individual to remain undetected for so long. The detective's patient strategy had narrowed the path to a moment of truth, one that would send shockwaves through the town. By summer, surveillance confirmed movements consistent with previous patterns from the night of Emily's disappearance. Minor deviations, unexpected trips, unusual routes, or altered schedules were recorded and interpreted in context, suggesting the suspect's awareness of heightened investigative focus. Monroe's team documented everything meticulously, knowing that any misalignment in observation could provide the final verification needed for confrontation or legal action. The detective's relentless pursuit had transformed the city itself into a living instrument of detection, where every street, vehicle, and building became part of the emergent narrative. In August 2011, a breakthrough arrived through forensic confirmation. Trace DNA collected decades earlier, once faint and nearly meaningless, now provided definitive matches linking the suspect to locations and objects associated with Emily Keller's disappearance. Fibers indicated repeated presence, industrial residues confirmed occupation-related movement, and environmental traces established access points previously overlooked. Monroe meticulously integrated these findings with behavioral analysis, witness statements, and surveillance, creating a narrative so precise that the detective was confident the suspect could not escape confrontation. Dayton, unknowingly, had participated in this revelation. Residents' memories, observations, and recollections had all contributed to the network of evidence now converging into clarity. The stage was set. Monroe, coordinating with multiple agencies, prepared for the direct confrontation that would define the final act of the cold case. Legal frameworks were confirmed, surveillance positions reinforced, and witness testimony validated. The suspect, while aware of minor law enforcement activity, remained oblivious to the full scope of evidence. 22 years of meticulous observation, forensic innovation, and behavioral analysis. The tension in Dayton was palpable, though invisible. The calm before the storm, the silence that precedes a long-awaited revelation, the collective breath held across decades of unresolved absence. In September, the confrontation commenced. Monroe, armed with irrefutable evidence and precise behavioral insight, initiated a carefully structured engagement. Questions were posed with surgical precision, environmental cues subtly manipulated, and inconsistencies highlighted. The suspect's reactions were measured, controlled at first, but gradually unraveling under the weight of decades of accumulated evidence. Every micro-expression, every hesitation, every attempt at deflection fed into Monroe's understanding. The detective, patient and relentless, guided the interaction toward inevitable confession. The confession, when it arrived, was both sudden and profoundly shocking. The suspect, unable to reconcile the precision of the evidence and the methodical observation applied over more than 2 decades, admitted to involvement in Emily Keller's disappearance. Details emerged slowly, chillingly, confirming the orchestrated nature of the act. Repeated surveillance, calculated timing, and a meticulous awareness of the town's rhythms. Dayton, upon learning of the confession, reacted with disbelief, horror, and a profound sense of closure. The cold case that had defined community anxiety for 22 years had finally reached its climax, bringing both accountability and the sobering reality of human cunning. News of the confession rippled through Dayton like a shockwave. Residents revisited memories, re-examined previous observations, and processed decades of subtle, lingering fear. Local media coverage, careful but relentless, documented the extraordinary persistence, forensic ingenuity, and patient determination that had culminated in resolution. Monroe's decades of relentless pursuit were widely acknowledged, establishing a benchmark for cold case investigations nationwide. The city's collective consciousness, long shaped by absence, now absorbed the sudden weight of revelation, balancing relief with the sobering recognition of long-hidden human malevolence. Even after the confession, the psychological echoes of Emily Keller's absence persisted. Dayton's streets, once quietly haunted, now bore the complex overlay of resolution and memory. Residents continued to navigate spaces once fraught with uncertainty, aware of the orchestration behind the long years of fear. Monroe, while gratified by resolution, recognized that closure was multifaceted. Justice had been served, but the imprint of absence, the cultural memory, and the psychological resonance of decades-long uncertainty remained. The cold case, now concluded, had left a permanent mark, illustrating both the power of meticulous investigation and the enduring weight of unresolved disappearance. By the end of 2011, Dayton had begun the slow process of collective reckoning. Public commemorations, community discussions, and renewed awareness of the impact of long-term absence reinforced both the gravity of the case and the extraordinary achievement of its resolution. Detective Monroe, reflecting on decades of pursuit, recognized that while the confession brought legal closure, the broader significance lay in the persistence of observation, the integration of forensic innovation, and the patient engagement of a community whose subtle contributions had been instrumental. The cold case, once a void of uncertainty, had transformed into a narrative of resolution, accountability, and the relentless pursuit of truth. By 2012, Dayton was navigating the delicate aftermath of a revelation that had lingered unseen for more than 2 decades. Emily Keller's disappearance, once an omnipresent shadow, had finally yielded to exposure, confession, and legal action. Yet the weight of those years remained palpable, echoing in every quiet street, in the cautious glance of residents, and in the lingering tension that had become the town's hidden rhythm. Detective Monroe, having guided the case from shadow to revelation, now found himself documenting the aftermath, the human cost, the legal process, and the subtle reshaping of a community forever changed by absence, deception, and fear. In the immediate wake of the confession, Dayton was a city in stunned reflection. Streets once traversed unconsciously now bore traces of the past. Apartment complexes, riverbanks, and alleyways that had been meticulously observed by a calculating mind now seemed charged with invisible history. Residents replayed memories, revisited minor anomalies, and questioned what had been overlooked. Children who had grown up hearing hushed tales of Emily Keller's disappearance now experienced the collision of rumor with reality. Shops reopened after brief closures to accommodate law enforcement inquiries. Neighbors gathered to discuss the implications of confession, and the subtle undercurrent of vigilance shifted toward acknowledgement rather than anticipation. The cold case had moved from mystery to revelation, but the psychological footprint lingered. Monroe coordinated closely with prosecutors, forensic experts, and federal authorities to ensure that the confession was fully documented, corroborated by evidence, and prepared for judicial scrutiny. Each piece of forensic material, DNA samples, fiber analysis, trace residues, was meticulously cataloged and referenced. Witness statements were revisited, cross-checked, and integrated with environmental reconstructions. The detective understood that decades of procedural diligence were as crucial as the confession itself. The narrative of methodical observation, behavioral analysis, and forensic advancement had to withstand legal scrutiny, public attention, and historical record. The cold case, long defined by uncertainty, had transformed into a formal, irrefutable chronicle of resolution. Community engagement evolved alongside the legal process. Residents, having internalized the tension of decades-long absence, now participated in the documentation, reflection, and preservation of historical memory. Public forums were convened to discuss the societal impact of prolonged disappearance and to acknowledge the resilience of families affected by uncertainty. Local media chronicled both the confession and its broader implications, focusing not solely on the crime itself, but on the sustained efforts that had yielded accountability. Dayton existed in a dual reality. Ordinary routines continued, yet the collective consciousness remained shaped by the extraordinary revelation of truth, careful orchestration, and human fallibility. For the Keller family, closure arrived in layers. The confession provided legal and evidentiary certainty, yet it could not erase the psychological toll of decades-long absence. Emotional interviews, counseling sessions, and community support mechanisms became central to their gradual recovery. Monroe maintained regular contact, recognizing the delicate balance between professional resolution and human compassion. The detective's presence offered continuity, a tangible reminder that persistent effort, relentless observation, and patience had finally converged to produce truth. The cold case, while legally concluded, continued to influence the emotional and psychological landscape of all involved. By 2013, the judicial process had progressed to formal proceedings. Evidence meticulously compiled over decades supported the case. DNA matches, behavioral analysis, forensic reconstructions, and witness statements were presented systematically. The suspect, previously a figure of strategic illusion, now faced the full force of legal accountability. Monroe, although relieved that the investigative phase had reached resolution, remained vigilant, aware that courtroom proceedings often introduce new complexities. The meticulous documentation and procedural diligence ensured that the case would withstand scrutiny, reinforcing the extraordinary work conducted over more than 20 years. The city's collective response remained layered. Daily life resumed, yet residents were acutely aware of the extraordinary narrative that had unfolded in their midst. Conversations referenced subtle past observations, unremarkable streets, now seen in a different light, and the extraordinary persistence required to bring resolution. Educational institutions incorporated discussions about forensic science, criminal psychology, and community vigilance into curricula. Dayton, having experienced both prolonged uncertainty and sudden revelation, emerged with a nuanced understanding of absence, human behavior, and the long arc of justice. Monroe, meanwhile, undertook the final synthesis of the case record. Chronologies spanning from October 1989 to the confession in 2011 were cross-referenced with forensic reports, witness statements, and environmental analyses. Each minute detail, vehicle movements, delivery schedules, environmental observations, and behavioral cues, was meticulously aligned to produce a coherent narrative, preserving both the technical precision and human complexity of the investigation. The detective recognized that the cold case's resolution was not solely measured in arrest or confession, but in the preservation of insight, methodical documentation, and the cultural and psychological imprint on the community. Public reaction to the resolution was intense, yet measured. Shock mingled with relief, fear with admiration for the investigative process. Local media featured in-depth retrospectives, highlighting Monroe's extraordinary persistence, the technological advancements that made resolution possible, and the subtle contributions of a community that had maintained collective vigilance over decades. Dayton had borne witness to both the consequences of absence and the potential for resolution through patience, skill, and integration of science and human insight. The cold case became a narrative of enduring societal resonance, demonstrating the intersection of human memory, forensic science, and investigative perseverance. By mid-2014, attention turned to the long-term effects of closure. Families affected by the unresolved disappearance sought counseling and community support. The town reflected on lessons learned about observation, vigilance, and human behavior. Monroe contributed to professional forums, sharing insights gained over more than 2 decades of methodical investigation. Case studies emphasize behavioral profiling, forensic innovation, and the integration of environmental and human observational data. The cold case, while legally resolved, continued to influence law enforcement strategy, academic study, and community awareness. Dayton itself emerged as a model for understanding the enduring impact of long-term absence and the mechanisms by which communities, combined with determined investigation, can facilitate resolution. The legacy of the Keller case persisted on multiple levels. Psychologically, the community carried an awareness of human vulnerability, the importance of vigilance, and the enduring consequences of unresolved crime. Legally, the meticulous documentation and corroborated confession ensured that accountability was concrete, enforceable, and instructive for future investigations. Socially, Dayton had absorbed a profound lesson in patience, observation, and the cumulative power of minor details, subtle recollections, and forensic innovation. Monroe, having guided the case from shadow to revelation, reflected on the extraordinary confluence of human persistence, technological advancement, and methodical reasoning that had ultimately produced justice. Even as 2014 drew to a close, the town experienced subtle echoes of the cold case's resolution. Streets once associated with unease now carried the overlay of narrative understanding. Residents retained heightened awareness, yet moved with the reassurance that the orchestrator of decades-long absence had been identified and held accountable. The legacy of the case extended beyond closure, shaping community vigilance, law enforcement methodology, and collective memory. Dayton had witnessed the extraordinary arc of investigation, the culmination of decades of uncertainty, and the ultimate assertion of accountability over human malevolence. By 2015, the Emily Keller case had entered its final chapter, a narrative that spanned over a quarter-century yet remained vivid in the collective memory of Dayton. The city itself had transformed under the weight of absence, revelation, and subsequent closure. Streets once haunted by the unknown now carried a heavy awareness of what had transpired, the memory of fear intertwined with the hard-won understanding of truth. Detective Monroe, having guided the investigation from the shadows of uncertainty to the illumination of confession and accountability, reflected on the extraordinary convergence of persistence, observation, and forensic innovation that had defined every step of the process. The final months of 2015 were spent consolidating the case for historical, educational, and professional purposes. Monroe meticulously cataloged every timeline, every observation, every forensic analysis, and every witness recollection. The accumulation of decades of methodical work formed a comprehensive archive, ensuring that Emily Keller's story and the extraordinary efforts required to resolve it would serve as both a cautionary and instructive resource for law enforcement professionals, forensic specialists, and community organizers. Each detail mattered. The precise sequence of events from October 1989, the subtle behavioral cues noted in 2010 and 2011, and the technological advancements that had allowed forensic evidence to finally illuminate the truth. The cold case, once defined by absence, uncertainty, and collective anxiety, had now been transformed into a detailed chronicle of resolution, persistence, and the long arc of justice. The community of Dayton experienced a complex emotional landscape. While relief was palpable, the person responsible identified, confession secured, and legal action underway, residual tension remained. Residents revisited old memories. Minor incidents that had seemed trivial decades earlier now acquired new weight. Families who had experienced fear and uncertainty relived those anxieties even as they celebrated closure. Public gatherings, town hall meetings, and commemorations acknowledged the extraordinary duration and impact of the case. The narrative of Emily Keller's disappearance, once fragmented and haunting, had become a communal story of resilience, memory, and the transformative power of persistent investigation. Monroe continued to engage with the Keller family and the broader community. Counseling, mediated discussions, and structured reflection provided pathways to emotional reconciliation. For the family, closure was not instantaneous. It was layered and complex. The confession, while offering legal and factual certainty, could not erase years of trauma, uncertainty, and the haunting presence of absence. Monroe's guidance, professionalism, and sustained involvement offered continuity and reassurance. He understood that the end of the investigative phase was the beginning of a different, equally challenging journey. The integration of resolution into daily life, memory, and emotional continuity. For law enforcement professionals and forensic scientists, the Keller case had become emblematic of the power of meticulous long-term investigation. Monroe's approach, integrating behavioral profiling, environmental reconstruction, forensic innovation, and persistent observation, was studied in workshops, conferences, and training programs. The case demonstrated how cumulative minor details, previously overlooked observations, and community memory could coalesce into actionable evidence decades after the initial crime. It emphasized that absence and uncertainty need not be permanent. With patience, analytical rigor, and technological support, resolution was possible. The cold case stood as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of methodological excellence. By mid-2015, Dayton had begun to reconcile with the psychological and social implications of the case. Neighborhoods, once shadowed by fear, exhibited subtle signs of restoration. Public spaces, parks, and streets were gradually reintegrated into daily life, though the memory of Emily Keller's disappearance remained embedded in communal consciousness. Schools, civic groups, and local organizations incorporated lessons from the case into education and public awareness programs. Vigilance, the importance of minor observations, and the integration of scientific innovation in investigative practice. The city itself had internalized the case as a complex narrative of human behavior, absence, and eventual justice. Monroe, reflecting on the case, recognized the interplay between persistence and adaptation. Over 25 years, investigative techniques evolved from rudimentary observation and witness interviews to sophisticated DNA analysis, behavioral profiling, and environmental reconstruction. Each phase built upon the previous, integrating historical data with emerging technology. The detectives' enduring patience and analytical precision had transformed a case once defined by uncertainty into a blueprint for cold case resolution. Dayton, unknowingly, had contributed to this success through collective vigilance, memory, and the subtle reporting of minor anomalies across decades. Legal proceedings culminated in late 2015 with the formal conviction of the individual responsible for Emily Keller's disappearance. The confession, corroborated by meticulous forensic and behavioral evidence, formed the backbone of the prosecution. Courtroom narratives highlighted the extraordinary persistence required to assemble decades of data, the integration of community observations, and the technological advancements that had allowed for conclusive identification. Public reaction was a mixture of shock, relief, and awe at the scale of investigative rigor. The town had witnessed the extraordinary intersection of human observation, scientific progress, and patient law enforcement that brought decades-long uncertainty to resolution. Even after the legal resolution, Dayton continued to experience the echoes of the cold case. Streets, parks, and apartment complexes carried a dual significance: ordinary functionality alongside historical memory. Residents' daily awareness was subtly shaped by the knowledge of what had transpired and how resolution had been achieved. Community vigilance persisted, now informed by both the historical lessons of Emily Keller's disappearance and the reassurance that long-term investigation could yield accountability. Dayton had internalized the narrative, creating a shared cultural memory anchored in absence, revelation, and justice. By the end of 2015, the case's influence extended beyond Dayton. Law enforcement agencies nationwide studied the Keller investigation as a model of cold case resolution. Behavioral profiling, forensic innovation, environmental reconstruction, and community integration were emphasized as essential tools. Monroe's meticulous record-keeping, patient observation, and methodical approach became the benchmark for future investigations. The cold case exemplified how long-term commitment, technological adaptation, and analytical rigor could overcome decades of uncertainty and concealment. For the Keller family and the community, the final months were devoted to reconciliation, remembrance, and reflection. Memorial events honored Emily's memory, emphasizing both the tragedy of loss and the extraordinary effort required to achieve resolution. Emotional closure, while nuanced, began to integrate into everyday life. The detective's guidance, alongside professional support, helped transform prolonged trauma into a structured process of understanding, memory preservation, and cautious healing. Dayton streets, once haunted by unanswered questions, now carried the weight of historical awareness and a cautiously restored sense of security. In summation, the Ohio 1989 cold case had evolved from a haunting disappearance into an enduring narrative of methodical resolution. Over 25 years, Detective Monroe's relentless pursuit, combined with community vigilance, technological advancement, and forensic innovation, transformed uncertainty into truth. Dayton emerged with a layered understanding of absence, memory, and the long arc of justice. The confession, legal accountability, and meticulous documentation ensured that Emily Keller's story would persist as both a cautionary and instructive example. The cold case, once defined by fear and uncertainty, now stood as a testament to persistence, analytical rigor, and the extraordinary power of human observation integrated with scientific progress. Even as the city moved forward, the echoes of Emily Keller's absence remained, a reminder of the fragility of security, the resilience of memory, and the profound impact of time on both human behavior and investigative methodology. Dayton had endured decades of uncertainty, yet through patience, science, and unwavering determination, the community had witnessed the ultimate assertion of justice over absence. The cold case was no longer a void. It was a narrative, a legacy, and a testament to the extraordinary potential of persistent investigation in the pursuit of truth.